on the length of that one. Because I think the cul-de-sac backed up to the church. You know that church, the LDS church that's down, it's backed up. It's on the east side of it.
Welcome everyone to North Ogden City Council. Meeting will now come to order. We'll begin by an invocation and a pledge of allegiance. I guess I volunteered for that one. Our dear Father in heaven, we're grateful for the opportunity we have together here this evening in our council meeting. We're thankful for the common cause which brings us together. We're grateful for the peace and freedom that we enjoy in this country, that we are able to meet together and discuss items pertaining to the operation of our city. Pray that thy guiding hand and blessings may be with us, that we may understand one another and have thy spirit guide and direct us in all many blessings, and acknowledge thy hand in all things. And do so in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
You all please arise. Repeat after me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
I still want to say too. You know.
As part of our consent agenda, a discussion or action to consider the minutes on February 6, 2018 City Council. Any discussion? Corrections?
Mayor, I'd move that we approve the consent agenda.
We've received the motion to the consent agenda by Councilman Swanson. Do I have a second?
I second that.
I have a second by Councilman Severine. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting now is open for public comment.
Thank you. My name is Paul Mackley. I live down just off of 1700 North in North Ogden, about 700 East, and there's a couple of items on the agenda. I want to express appreciation that they'll be discussed tonight. I'm going to have to leave in a little bit, but two things. We own a parcel of ground that's currently in the county. It's been our horse pasture for a number of years, and lately my two daughters that are adults would like to move and build next to us, and so it would require an annexation. And I think that item number 13 pertains to island annexations, and I think that would be a good thing for me to have a very clean and simple process whereby the county and the city work together to annex that property into the city. And then the other item, number 9, the discussion on cul-de-sac length is related as well, because with the current ordinance, the planners and the city officials are saying that what we would need to do is to do and Jim Flint will be here later or maybe in weeks to come, but what would be necessary now with the current ordinance on the cul-de-sac length, I think it's limited to 500 feet. And with our parcel, the way it's been developed around us, this would require a road would go right through our existing front yard and connect with the street. And that our home was built probably 12 years ago, and then previously we moved into another home that was built when I first got out of school, probably 29 years ago. So the effect of the development around us now would leave a side road into this development that probably wouldn't be the best economically or from just a neighborhood standpoint. I've had a couple of neighbors ask me about the stakes that are being placed out in the horse pasture, and they're getting nervous, and they're saying, well, what will happen here? And I said, well, right now it's master planned to put a road right through here. And so Elon Barble and Derek Harames are probably the ones most immediately affected by that, and I think we all as a neighborhood would be appreciative if you would consider that proposal that Sarah Fossen, Councilwoman Fossen, has presented to alter that zoning ordinance so that it would allow an increased length in that cul-de-sac, which would extend it from where it currently is, about 500 feet, to advance it to, I think, according to the international fire protection standards, there could be 30 units on a cul-de-sac, which would be more than we would want by double, but it would still be an extension of a cul-de-sac. and then it wouldn't require that side street to be placed right there where it's now currently master planned. So thanks for your consideration. I know you're busy. There's a lot of things on the agenda, but I know it would be a process of just kind of fleshing out the pros and the cons. But I think we as a little neighborhood right there, about 10 homeowners and my family, so 11 of us, would be very appreciative if that could be looked at and reviewed, and then maybe teach us what we need to do to help with the process. But Jim Flint's here, like I say, helped us engineer and design that. And anyway, thank you so much. That's all my comments. Appreciate your service.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Rustin Monson, 2564 Barker Parkway. On February 6th, I attended North Ogden City's council meeting regarding the amphitheater, specifically to voice my concern and get simple questions answered regarding parking and fire code issues. I asked the council and others that if you do not have answers to my questions, to please write them down, and I'd be happy to get them from you at the next council meeting. Then I attended the next council meeting on February 13th. However, the lack of information I left with prompted me to make 2 grandma requests. I returned to the previous council meeting, to this one, held on March 6, 2018. My intent was to voice my concern to City Council and Mayor that there is contradiction between 2 building permits and a site plan. After researching all documents that were sold to me by the city, I believe they have violated their own codes and policies in attempt to obtain 2 building permits. 1 building permit in particular is currently being appealed. North Ogden City Council members, Mayor, City Attorney, and Planning Director have all received a copy of my summary via email. However, I will read it for the public's benefit. Building permit 18-45 is not valid and should never have been issued. Likewise, building permit 17-397 should never have been issued. The issuance of both permits requires approval of a valid and complete site plan. And there is simply no approved site plan. What does exist is a motion made on September 20th, 2017, as stated in Notice of Decision Letter dated September 21st, 2017, asking North Ogden Planning Commission to approve the Barker Park concept site plan and amphitheater site plan, and that a certificate of occupancy not be granted until a final landscape and parking plan be approved by the Planning Commission. This motion and subsequent notice of decision does not constitute an approved site plan. As per city code, North Ogden City has violated its own rules and regulations regarding the sequence and content requirements of the building process, putting North Ogden City residents at risk financially and ultimately not prioritizing public safety. And that's as stated in 11-10-27, site plan approval required. Building permit 18-45 must therefore be revoked and construction stopped until all requirements are met for the issuance of such a permit. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
So Annette needs a copy of anything people read from. Annette needs a copy of anything that's read. Okay.
Good evening. I'm Aaron Christensen, 2428 Barker Parkway. Mr. Monson and I, my name is also on that appeal for the building permit 1845. A couple things we wanted to bring to your attention if you're not aware of it already. With that staff report that was given to us the night of the September 20th when we were invited here, there's some major problems with it as we've gone through it. Some minor, some major. First of all, the city needs to correct the address that they keep listing for Barker Park as 2375 is what comes up when you Google Barker Park. However, 2375 would be an address on the west side of the street, and that is, this park is on the east side of the street. So if this is a legal document, we need to pay attention to details. A little bigger concern, one of the requirements for this is to list the parcel ID. If you look at the staff report from September 20th, parcel ID number 172730001. It's the first one listed on the parcel ID. That is a parcel, it's a 1/3 acre building lot in Pleasant View, a private residence. Okay. And that has nothing to do with Barker Park or the amphitheater or North Ogden. Again, paying attention to details when we're dealing with legalities. Applicable ordinances, it says design and location of parking spaces, and yet the site review staff comments say that this site plan review does not have the information that's requested or required by North Ogden City Code. A housekeeping item, if you turn to pages 2 through 5, at the top it says ZMA 2017-04 Maverick Site Plan Review. This is not the Maverick Site Plan Review. So we have the wrong address for the park, we have the wrong parcel number listed on the parcels, we have the wrong title with Maverick Site Plan Review, we have an incomplete application. There's been some question as far as the zoning regulations, as far as the height restrictions. I know council members have commented that there is no height requirement or maximum height for RE20. However, when I called the city before we had heard from the council members, I was directed to a building inspector who said he would double check it for me and got back to me and said height restriction for all zones in North Ogden City is 35 feet. It is correct that in the code, it doesn't list a maximum height. But we didn't get that from looking on our own. We got that from the city. The city building inspector told us 35 feet. So there's some question there as what needs to be corrected. And then interesting, on the last page of on page 4 of the Maverick Site Plan Review, the recommendations say staff recommends approval of the site plan and pole sign conditional use permit subject to conditions in the staff report. To our knowledge, there's not going to be a pole sign at Barker Park Amphitheater. But when you go to the Maverick Site Plan Review, those are word for word. They forgot to correct that, and they ask for the site plan and the pole sign conditional use permit. So at very least, this is sloppy work on the part of the city. So when we bring it to the city's attention and people give us flack for saying this was rushed, we're talking about the process that is going through this. This is a legal process, and the city is not following that legal process. The Maverick site plan required a technical review. A question, Mr. Mayor, do you know who could tell me why there was no technical review conducted for the Barker Park Amphitheater?
Yeah.
Be Rob.
Pardon?
Rob Scott.
Rob Scott.
Okay, so Rob, I should address that to Rob.
Right.
Okay, thank you. I will follow up with him. Mr. Scott's report to Mayor Taylor on September 21st says that the commission made a motion to approve the site plan, but the approval is subject to conditions in the staff report. So it's not a complete site plan review. It's not passed yet. And he includes a comment about the sign and asks that they bring the information back about the sign. So it appears that he went right off of the incorrect Maverick site plan review instead of the Barker Park. And so my time is up, but we'd ask you to look at these things. You took an oath of office to support and sustain the Constitution of the United States and of Utah, and it doesn't take an attorney to see that we're not following our own rules. And we'd ask you to please follow the rules. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment,
Sean Casey, Barker Parkway, 2444. Last week, I was interested in finding out how come the RE20 height, the building height restriction, was struck from the North Ogden Code, and I was just wondering if you had any details for me on that particular code.
Are you familiar with that?
I mean, I can point you to the minutes where it was done, if you'd like, Mayor. I mean, I can give you some information about that.
You can, if anybody, it was historically in our code that we had a 35-foot building height, as Aaron just mentioned, and it seems like we're still following that code, but I think in our ordinance, I think it was in 2013, 2012, I'm not sure, 11. It was just the maximum height was struck, and so last week I asked why, and I didn't expect an answer then, but I kind of would like one today. If not, I guess it's okay. I can give you some of the reasons why it might be a good idea to reinstate that max height.
I don't know why the council did it. I wasn't here in 2012 or 2011 when it was passed.
That's something we'll have to research.
All right. I would appreciate it. A couple examples. I'm in RE20. I'm a ham radio enthusiast, and that's a particular interest I follow. And if I put an antenna farm in my yard, Aaron doesn't have much he can say about it if I exceed 35-foot height with no height restriction. Also, if I decide I want to design a backyard electric motocross track with features that are quite large, and Councilwoman Cheryl Stoker could probably attest, that is something I might want to pursue, as I have in the past. Aaron would not have a lot he could say about it. Again, it would be an electric motocross bike, and I would, of course, water my track, so it's not a dust concern, it's not a noise concern. It's simply me having fun with a 35-foot takeoff and a 35-foot landing or higher. So those are a couple quick things that personally I have interest in that might actually happen if there wasn't a height restriction. There's also some safety things about the height restriction that I think are a good idea as far as ladder height, and we're talking about safety codes with length of cul-de-sacs, which has some bearing, I would think, on so public safety being the first and foremost of a process of why we would have a minimum maximal kind of an arrangement with building height. So something to think about for the city. And next week I'll hope for some feedback from you, from the council and the mayor. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Casey.
I don't think there's going to be a meeting next week because of the caucuses. Next Tuesday night is the caucuses, so we won't be having, at least we haven't in the past, had council meeting on caucus night.
It's our budget meeting that afternoon, but we're done at 6.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other comments from the group?
My name is Peggy Barker. I live at 2553 North Fruitland Drive. And we seem to be talking about Barker Park. As we worked on planning the north and east part of the park, my cousin Steve would, about once a month at our meeting, say there will be no houses to fund the development of the park. We went ahead and made our plans without any housing for it. And Mayor Taylor at one point said, because there had not been the protection put on my Uncle Carl's section, he said, the best protection for this is that it actually be developed into a park as we have now planned it. And I thought that was a very wise kind of thing to say, that once it really is a park, then there will be no houses. As I'm watching the trouble over the amphitheater, and first, when it became phase 1, I again asked the mayor, well, wait, we've done all this planning and I'm very excited about it, but now the amphitheater is phase one. And he said, as people sit and they watch a performance and they look across the hill and they see the field and someone says, that is to be the rest of the park. And people would then become aware of it. They would look across, they may look at the plans that we had made, and then some momentum and some funding again would occur to finish developing the rest. Many people do not have any awareness of how large that space is, of what the actual boundaries of the park are. But by coming to events, they may begin to learn. I apologize for being late. I have been asked to make a yes amp sign for several people, and they interrupted me as I was on my way here. I am excited to see the amphitheater completed. It is discouraging to see the battles. I would hope that all of the technicalities can be worked out. If that means lowering the curve by 5 feet, then I don't know why that would bother an architect that much, but I am really eager to see all of this resolved, and resolved in a way that everyone can be happy about it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Steve Rasmussen, 1092 East, 3250 North. The thing that piqued my interest a little bit was this 35-foot height restriction. I don't have any idea why maybe it was taken out, but I'm not for restrictions. I'm not for restrictions on people's property that say they can't do this, they can't do that, and they can't do this. We need some restrictions, obviously, so we can all get along together, but putting added restrictions into building codes or the city plan that don't necessarily need to be there, which I don't see any reason for a 35-foot height restriction on anything. If I want to do something in my yard, like you said, put up an antenna or something like that, and it's more than 35 feet, why shouldn't I be able to do that? It's my property. I'm not affecting anyone else. It may not look as good as something that somebody would like to see there, but why shouldn't I be able to do that? So I'm not for any more restrictions on things in the building code than absolutely need to be there. And I think sometimes we tend to restrict things because we have the ability to do it, but I'm not sure it's a good idea sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. If there's no other comments, we'll proceed with the agenda. Item number 2 is establishing a city band. The presenter is Lauren Jepson.
I have with me here tonight also another supporter of this particular band, Mr. Brent Broom, and I will speak to his affiliation here in just a few minutes. My name is Lauren Jepson. I am a 18-year resident here in North Ogden. I love this community. It has been a joy to be here and to support the community's events and its neighborhoods and all the other things that happen here. That is the reason, one of the reasons why I want to support anything that will promote goodness within the community. And that brings me to the reason why I am promoting or proposing that we organize a concert band in the city that would be similar to those currently organized in similar cities in the northern Utah area. The band would eventually be composed of 40 to 70 volunteer members of mostly unaffiliated band musicians and a volunteer director-conductor united by their love of music, a desire to promote community pride, and enrich musicians and music education. As I pointed out, the band that I proposed to be established would be made up of totally volunteer members. It is important that we find a sponsor to help us with this organization, and I propose that North Ogden City be that sponsor. There are several reasons for that, one of which is, first, we need a place to practice. And the most logical place here in the community of North Ogden would be the Northview Senior Citizen Center. I have talked with Tiffany Staley about the use of that facility, and she tells me that there are vacancies in the building on Wednesday nights and some Tuesdays, so that we would have to adjust back and forth. The next reason for a sponsorship by the city would be that we need to do some serious recruiting to bring people out of their closet, so to speak, and we're looking for specifically closet musicians, those people that have been trained in musical instruments and their use through the excellent programs that we have within our high schools and junior high schools. And then for some reason, life happened and they put their instruments away for a period of time, but they still have a desire in their hearts to be involved in music in a certain way. To be able to do this recruiting, we would like to be able to utilize the resources of the city, namely the websites, Facebook pages, and the North Ogden Connection magazine. Of course, along with that, we'd have to do recruiting for the school bands, and also through bulletin boards and local businesses, music stores, and other priorities that we might come up with. The next reason that we would like to have the city sponsor us, of course, is that you have access to various funding sources. In my discussion with Tiffany, I was made aware that there's a possibility that we might be able to apply for a ramp grant for under $2,000. This would go a long way in providing music that the band would need to get started and to start the activity within the community. Now, where does the city benefit by all of this? For one thing, it would involve a lot of citizens within the community that love music, love the community, and want to have some way of expressing themselves, musically or otherwise, for the benefit of the community in various civic events, such as Cherry Days and the fireworks events that we have. We could also branch out into Founders Day for Pleasant View. There are opportunities for summer band concerts, and we could also do performances in local schools to help the students in the schools become familiar with music and music education and the importance that music has in their lives. I hope that you've had an opportunity to review through this document that I produced on the internet, and by that perhaps you have some questions that you would like to ask about the organization and the longevity of a band here in North Ogden, its purpose, and how we might be able to govern its organization, etc. I open that up to you, city council members, if you have questions.
Lauren?
Yes.
Could you, maybe so everybody who may not have seen the document, you're not asking the city to buy the instruments, or?
Oh, no.
Yeah, so
No, all of the instruments would be provided by the volunteer members themselves. Now, over the long run, And I'm looking for this to be an organization within the city that will last a long, long time. And in time, there will be changes, of course, that will occur. And one of the things that I'm a member currently right now of the band in Clearfield. And that's one reason why I'm starting to initiate one here in North Ogden. Why go to Clearfield and support all their activities when I can do it in my own hometown? Anyway, there are certain things that we can start out with at the ground level. Each member will bring their own instrument, of course, and we could even ask for them to bring their own music stands, etc. And because of limited space in the Northview Senior Citizen Center, we may have to take all of that back home with us. I don't know if there's any possibility for storage there at that facility. Over time, we may be able to acquire certain types of instruments, drums, for instance, various percussion instruments, things of that nature that are difficult to transport back and forth. And then in time, there are other things that we could add. We could get programs for our concerts, other things that will become important. And of course, one of the big issues of the band itself is having music. Now, to start out, we might be able to find some music on the public domain by trading with various organizations, etc. But that is very inconvenient to do, and at times we would not be able to get the instrumentation that we would require. So hopefully with grant monies, with sponsorships, donations, and other ways and means, we can attempt to build up funds that we need over time to make this an organization that will last within the community. I don't know if that answers your question, Carl.
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
Very good. Any other questions?
Mayor? It looks like from the information that you gave us that you're estimating startup costs would be about $4,300. Is that correct? I saw two different figures in there. One was $1,800. The other was, and I can't remember what it was for. And then you had another for equipment acquisition and replacement, music stands, and certain percussion instruments. So from the city standpoint, financially, what are you looking for from the city, if anything?
Well, as I mentioned, this is going to be a grassroots effort. And to start out, we would attempt to apply for a ramp grant, just specifically to obtain the music that we need to get started. Everything else at that point would be pretty much donated by the members of the band themselves, music stands, et cetera, and instruments. And we'll have to put up with any inconvenience that there may be in transporting things back and forth and the lack of storage. As I pointed out in the document, some of these things that I put in here as far as costs are things that we would be looking at over time, and hopefully being able to acquire sponsorships and donations, other grants, etc. The other thing that we needed to get the band started is a director-conductor, and I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Brent Broom, who lives in the area and is a professional musician, and he's also academically trained in directing and conducting, and he has volunteered to start out as our conductor. So we're very happy to have that resource to get started. Any other questions?
Any questions, council?
I got a couple. So how soon would this be? Are you hoping to get it started? And then I believe the grant applications, John, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, they have to be in like at the first of the year, and then you don't find out until So, I mean, we'd be at least another 8 months before you'd get a grant application. Are you trying to get this started sooner than that? And
From what Tiffany tells me, the type of grant that we're applying for has to be in by the end of this month.
oh, the end of this month?
Yes.
Okay.
And then, of course, it has to go through a sifting process, and we're hoping that we would be successful. Without that $2,000 grant, it's going to be extremely difficult to get anything off the ground, to be quite frank.
Okay.
Now, you had another question.
No, I mean, it was just how soon would you want to get started, but you need the money to get started, so that makes sense.
Well, I'm looking at this very optimistically, of course. I would like to be able to participate in some way with the Cherry Days festival that we have coming up in July. Now, this would be a push. And I'm not saying that we would have a full band at that point. It's interesting, I've done some looking on the internet to find out what other people have done as far as organizing community bands. And there's one thing that I found for a band in Illinois, and if I might read this. It says, in the early days of the North Shore Band, the 11 members, and that's all that showed up for their first practice, 11 members, rehearsed in a small room in the social hall of the sponsoring veterans organization. The level of musicianship was not too high to begin with, and because of the bar, it often dropped lower following the rehearsal break. Some of the players were a bit unorthodox, to say the least. For instance, one bass player performed by elevation, in quotation marks. He had never learned to read music, but if the notes looked higher on the lines, he would squeeze his lips a little more and press different buttons until he found the right combination. In the same band, there was an old gentleman who played the snare drum. He had arthritis in his hand so bad that he could hardly hold the sticks, but he was our only snare drummer for about 4 years. Then his son came and played the saxophone. They were both just pitiful players, but wonderful people. They are no longer in the band, but to this day, they carry with them the joy, the beauty, and the pleasure that came into their lives during those years that they were able to be part of the group. And their comment was unfailing, or the commitment was unfailing. Now, I'm hoping that we'll probably do a little bit better than that as far as getting our band going and established. And like I say, we're going to be totally volunteer. We're looking for people that at least have a high school band experience. And there's no age limit beyond that. I love to play. I'm 74 years old, and I plan to continue until I can't blow anymore. And so I'm sure that we have some others out there that are so-called closet musicians who have a desire to pull the old instrument out of the closet and start developing their embouchure one more time. That's their position of the instrument in their lips. It takes a little bit of muscle development, quite frankly. And take up the instrument once again and play in a group that enjoys being in the city and performing for the city. Anything else? I don't know what procedure we would have to go through as far as establishing a sponsorship by the city. If there's any particular paperwork that has to be officialized or whatever. Or what discussion you people need to give us a wave of approval or otherwise. I don't know if Brent here has any comments that he would like to add.
Just a couple things. It's going to take time. I've been involved with community bands before. I've had my own bands. I was the founder and director of the Great Basin Symphonic Band and also the Great Basin Jazz Band. It takes time to develop those type of organizations. Both those organizations turned out to be excellent musicians, excellent organizations to play with. And the members were happy. We're really happy to be there. So it's going to take some time. Part of the reason we're coming to you is that to get a founding, to get it backing from the city. That's very important to establish an establishment of the band. Because again, we can work with you, do things, have not sponsor, but participate in activities they're put on by the city, which will help out those type of activities. So I'm excited to be here, excited to be the director of the band. Like I said, I've had quite a bit of experience. I have a master's degree in conducting, and so I'm excited to get going and to work with the musicians and bring them up to a level that we're all proud of and that we would enjoy immensely. Thanks.
I see this as a win-win. The people playing in the band, of course, will have pleasure and enjoyment in doing so, and we're also providing music and entertainment and other good things, events for the city in the long run. So thank you for your attention to this matter, and we'll do whatever it takes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your discussion.
Thank you.
So, Mayor, we don't have a meeting next week, and if the grant application needs to be in the end of the month, I don't know if we can make a decision, but I'm okay with applying for the grant or something like this. I think that would be a wonderful event. We're having budget discussions come up. It'd be interesting to see where we are at on that. But I mean, since we only have a few weeks left in this month to apply for a grant, I would suggest that we probably have Tiffany at least get the ball rolling that way. I don't know how anybody else feels on the council, but that's what I would suggest.
You need to work with Tiffany Staley in the rec department to get the grant put together.
Right. We'll do that.
Okay.
I don't have any problem with the city standing behind that. I think it'd be fun.
You play the instrument?
I don't.
I would ask the audience here to raise their hands, but I don't want to embarrass anyone. So, but I'm sure there's plenty here that probably have a clarinet in their closet or something. So, thank you.
Okay.
I got a rifle.
Thank you very much.
You play an instrument?
This is not public comment yet.
Oh, it's not. Oh, we're in the middle of okay, I thought we were.
Okay. Next on our agenda is a discussion and action to consider contribution request from YCC. Our presenter will be Julie Smith.
Thank you so much, and I want to thank you very sincerely for the jobs that you do. I thought my job was tough, and now I'm getting a greater appreciation. We, number one, would like to thank you for your contributions last year. They made a big difference. And I would like to say, unfortunately, once again, the number one cause of homicides in Utah is what? Domestic violence. And where should we feel the safest? Where? Thank you. In our homes. And that's what we're trying to do. I've got some fantastic people. Well, everybody here is fantastic, but we've got some folks here from YCC that will be happy to answer questions along with myself, because our whole goal is to make life safe for people. And North Ogden's awesome. I live here, and I want to continue to feel that this is the very best place, the best state, the best city. And I will say that through the last 6 months, when we were here before, some of the cities that I went to asked, they honestly believed that they did not have any problems with domestic violence within their city boundaries. You're smiling, Phil. How come? Is that a little
It's a very naive thought.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. So we started in September to keep tabs on, because we had zip codes. And so we started to try to find the cities that these people are actually coming from. And North Ogden, we served 24 people in the last 6 months. And we feel that it's so important to have these services available, because when your officers go out, and they are a part of the lethality assessment where they ask the 11 questions as to how high the danger is. And when they go out and they find that a person or persons, a lot of times there are children involved, are in high danger, that's the time to move. That's the time to get them in a safe place. And what would the police officers do if it's like, let's say it's 11 o'clock at night? Where are they going to take these people at 11 o'clock at night? Anyone have any ideas? If they don't have friends, relatives, and frankly, if they take them to a friend or relative's home, they're putting them in danger. And so it's important that they have a very safe, secure place to go. And that's why we're here. We feel like we're an important part of public safety. We want to make sure that when these people go somewhere else, that they feel secure, they're offered food, clothing, whatever it is they need. And we have shown here, generally speaking, clients that we serve will stay for approximately 45 days. It's about $150 a day, and that comes out to about $6,750 for them to move on to self-sufficiency. And I'd love to tell you the stories about what we see, how we see these people come in, so often terrified, not knowing if they have a future. I had a lady sitting in my office, it was so exciting, this past week, and she has two beautiful babies. One's 12 months old and one is 8 weeks old. And she did not think she would ever be able to support herself. We gave her a scholarship, thanks to contributions of a local person, gave her a scholarship, and she is going to go to the ATC now. And she's so excited because she's going to be able to earn her CNA. And there were tears running down her face because she never envisioned herself being able to do that. And her children are now staying in our child care, because we also have a child care there. And those are the kinds of things that we see. Our folks here will vouch, we pay lousy. And therefore, our paydays are when we see these people succeed. We had over 19,000 nights of shelter that we provided. I don't even know how many meals, because we offer 3 meals a day. That these are the kinds of things that we see every day, and we're asking for North Ogden to be a part of that, to join with us, and to help us make sure that we always have a safe place for these people to go. And then we not only work with them to have classes in self-esteem, because so many of them think that they don't deserve to succeed. So we have classes. We work with them to go to court. We get protective orders. These are the advocates that are out there all the time, 24/7. We respond to make sure that they get the resources that they need, that they feel empowered to move on. We have homeless housing so that they are able to have a place, and we work with them literally through the entire process. And I'm trying to keep this very short. I've skipped through this because now I have got these handouts. I emailed them ahead. Does anyone want handouts? Are we okay? All right. Questions. And like I said, I've got some really awesome people here that would be happy to help out. Questions, please.
Mayor, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Julie, I've worked as a sexual assault nurse examiner for about 12 years for Newsane, and we often refer people to the YCC who are in need of shelter. And I know we also take advantage of the volunteer and paid advocates that the YCC provides for Weber County, including North Ogden City. I wonder if it might be helpful for the council to know, do you have any idea the number of people who seek shelter that are from the North Ogden area within a year? Do you keep track of that?
Well, as I mentioned before, we kept track the last 6 months. It was 24. And so, yeah, we're getting about one a week. And so we think more than likely within a year, you're probably talking about 48 people from North Ogden.
Okay, and I'm sorry, that is in your packet. So I would just like to give my comments to the council that this is a service that is provided to our county, to Weber County by the YCC. We take advantage of their services. It's part of our public safety. If you talk to a law enforcement officer, they work very closely with the victim advocate, as also our group does, who serves victims of violent crime. So I would really encourage the city to consider this as part of the funding as we're considering the budget. I won't be there for those discussions, but I just want you to know that we see them as really valuable contributors in working with victims of violent crimes, both from the aspect of domestic violence, sexual assault. These shelters provide a really important service in our community. In the past, I think North Ogden has had discussions about donating to Newsane, the group that I had worked for, and decided not to donate because they felt like they didn't use the services. But as Julie has provided for you, we are using these services, and I think we should pay at least a small portion of the pie for the services that are being offered. We're getting a great deal in this too, because a lot of the services are actually offered by volunteers, and so we are getting these services really in realistic terms. We're getting them at a discounted rate, and so I would be in favor of this contribution.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your input, and we're going to miss you.
You're welcome.
Yes.
John, do you remember how much we gave last year?
It was $8,000.
It was $8,000?
Yeah. And I believe that's what we have in the budget already, that'll be presented to you next week.
Okay. So what do you need from us then? Do we need to make a motion on this?
Yes.
I'd move then that we approve the donation of $8,000 to the YCC.
I would second the motion.
We have a motion from Councilman Swanson to contribute to $8,000 to the YCC. We have a second by Councilwoman Fossen. Any other discussion? We'll begin the voting. Councilwoman Stoker?
Yes.
Councilman Swanson?
Yes.
Councilwoman Fossen?
Yes.
Councilman Severin?
Yes.
Councilman Turner?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. Well,
next item is a consider request from Coldwater Animal Hospital. Is there anyone here from the hospital? Okay.
My name is Dave Shoup, or Dr. Shoup. I'm a veterinarian at Coldwater Animal Hospital. I guess I'm unfamiliar with the procedure, so you're going to have to help coach me. What do you need me to do?
You state your request.
Coldwater Animal Hospital is requesting either the purchase or co-lease of the property located between the hospital and the old city shops for a parking development. I have a drawing that I can post on the board if that's helpful.
It should be.
Yep, there it is. So Coldwater Animal Hospital would be towards the quay that's listed there, and the old city shops would be on the other side. To point that out, this is the animal hospital. Here's the old city shops. We're looking at either purchasing or co-leasing this section of property here to install some parking. Currently, that property is being used by North Ogden City as more or less a staging area, if I'm not mistaken. Oftentimes you'll bring asphalt and dump it there for a day or two and then later pick it up and move it. Same thing with rocks and gravel. But there's really no reason that same staging couldn't happen behind the old city shops if that is necessary for a place for that to happen. I don't see why it couldn't happen there. There is a cell tower located, again, pardon me. This is a cell tower right here, and when I talked to John Call, really the only requirement is that there be an easement to have access to that cell tower. So parking facility would certainly facilitate that easement.
Are you in need of extra parking spaces? Is that your purpose, or?
We will be shortly, because Washington Boulevard is slated, if I'm not mistaken, for a widening that's coming up, and with the construction that's coming there, it'll make it easier for staff and or clients to park close to the hospital.
Questions from the council?
John, would we have to declare this as surplus property and then put it out to public bid, or what are the processes here?
Well, so anytime you give up a real property interest, whether it be a lease or a sale, you would declare it as surplus. But you can limit who's available to, or who wants to bid on it. Essentially, like, there wouldn't be any reason to sell this triangle to somebody who doesn't have an adjacent purpose for it.
Right.
And a lease would be the same thing. I mean, you could put any parameters on that you needed to, as long as you're not giving it to a family friend or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
But we probably would do some study to figure out what the property was worth, either for sale or lease, for this type of a thing.
Part of coming here for me is to find out what the city has planned, if anything, for that particular parcel.
Is Dave still here? There he is. Could we have Dave come up and kind of give us an idea from Public Works perspective what that's used for, Mayor? Is that okay?
Sure.
So he's exactly right. That's exactly what it's used for, is the staging area right now. For instance, the lining project that's going on with our sewer lining, they're using that property right now. But like he said, I mean, we could move them into the back area. So, but as far as in the future, that's really kind of up to you as a council and administration. So,
I walked the property, and it appears it will not detract from future purposes since it's off in the corner, but that'd be my input. But
do we know about how big it is?
It looks like it's about 0.16 acres is what I guess.
When I walked it off, width-wise, we'd need about 65 feet from our fence going in a westward direction, and about 115 feet on the long axis from where the road starts to bend there towards the fence that encompasses that cell tower.
Yeah, I took an average of, since it sloped, I took a measurement up the center.
Yep, I agree. So if you figured at 0.16 acres, I have no reason to disagree with that.
Somewhere in that neighborhood.
So, John, is there in my head, it seemed like, and maybe Dave could answer this too, when we were looking at that property for years ago for selling it and some other items, we were concerned about some bad soils and stuff. Is that still a concern in that area or not?
We would do
or am I?
We would do an environmental analysis before the whole piece was ever sold commercially, just because it's been a city shop and other things for so long that any potential buyer would want probably a level 2 environmental analysis.
Would we need to do it for that little parcel?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I don't know that there's ever been buildings on that corner, but that has been where we'd stored a lot of asphalt and stuff, so it might not be a bad thing to look at.
And from my standpoint, I'm not opposed to considering this. It seems like it's a viable option for that property, so.
One of my initial thoughts was, would it have any impact on the sale of the rest of that property for future commercial development? And having driven by it earlier today, I don't know that it necessarily would, being off in the corner like that. So my initial feel is I don't have a problem with it.
Any other questions or discussion?
Would you need to come back, though, with staff with some type of an agreement or more information on this before we decide?
So before the council can actually declare it as surplus property, we have to give a 14-day notice and hold a public hearing. In the past, those typically haven't been strongly or largely attended, but it just is the requirements of the state code. And in that time, we could find out what it's worth, and then as well as bring you options on kind of the lease option or the purchase option. And then the council can make a decision on what they'd like to do.
I think that's a viable solution. So, do we need a motion on that, or is that just your blessing to do that and we bring it back, or what do you need from us?
Need a motion to proceed?
I think you could do a motion to set a hearing and explore those things, and then that.
We need to see how long an appraisal takes first, John.
The biggest thing will be the hang up on the appraisal time. You could still declare it as surplus property, and then we can work in an agreement on the price after the declaration's been made. It's not like everything has to be done the same night.
I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say.
I'll say it.
How you say it.
I'm ready.
Do it. Go for it.
I move that we set a hearing to examine Dave Shoup's request for the parking lot on the old city ground area.
We have a motion by Councilwoman Severine.
Second.
We have a second by Councilman Swanson. Voting, any other discussion?
That was very eloquent.
Councilman Swanson?
Yes.
Councilwoman Fossen?
Yes.
Councilman Severine?
Yes.
Councilman Turner?
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Yeah. Next item is discussion or action to consider minor revisions to Cherry Springs Villas Development Agreement. Presenter is John Call.
So, council, this is the development agreement that we approved last year. I think November 14th was the day we approved it. And since that time, the company who is going to be running this development has incorporated under an actual name for the development. And so we just need to amend the agreement to make it clear that we are interacting with the right group and the agreements with them. So everything in this document that's purple is something that's been changed. And as explained, it's all pretty much pretty minor adjustments. The one change here that might be the most substantial thing is that the name of the street is actually 100 East, not 150 East, as well as changing things like the mayor's name to Brent Chugg as opposed to Brent Taylor. One thing that, just to make it clear, this 40 units was something that was agreed upon, the idea being that the council or the developer had to construct their clubhouse after the first 40 units are built. We've just rephrased that to say after the first 10 buildings. So they're fourplex buildings, so it's 40 units. And so it just was kind of a clarification. And that's kind of the gist of the agreement. As far as changes go, it's still the same agreement, which gives them the MPC zone and allows them to put in a little bit more dense than might otherwise be under any of our other zones. If you remember, that's when we gave them the MPC zoning. So I'll leave it to you to make a discussion. I can also, do you want to see the map of where this is for council members who aren't aware? And probably it's good for the public as well. So the Cherry Springs property is the sod farm. So Pleasant View Drive is up here, 2700's down here. We also have the developer's representative, Dave Erickson, is here as well, and he can answer any questions you have. He's also here for the next agenda item, that's the protection strip agreement that we'll talk in a little more detail about. So do you have any questions for him on this?
Any questions from the council? We have a motion.
You have an agreement number. It's A4-2018.
Mayor, I'd move that we approve agreement A4-2018 approving minor revisions to Cherry Springs Villas Development Agreement A15-2017.
We have a motion by Councilman Swanson.
I second it.
We have a second by Councilman Severine. Any other discussion? We'll begin the voting by Councilwoman Fossen.
Yes.
Councilman Severine.
Yes.
Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Motion passes. Next item is discussion or action to consider a protection strip agreement for Cherry Springs Villas. That will be presented by John Call.
So, council, for those of you who were on the council last election cycle, a protection strip agreement occurs when a developer is bringing infrastructure, roads, pipes, and things like that in close proximity to a neighboring parcel, but not on that parcel. And our code allows for that developer to hold a little piece of ground between them and the neighbor that has to be purchased, as well as they have to pay for the improvements that were brought along their property line, so that it's essentially tries to make it equal so that someone doesn't get a windfall because the road comes in next to them and the pipes and all those things. And so that's what this agreement is. This agreement is it's still long and complicated because it's a legal document, but the terms of the agreement are a little simpler than the one that we saw last year, in the sense that there actually is not water and sewer lines being run under this road. So let me pull up the map of the development. And I should say under the entirety of the road. So the protection strip is going to be here along the east side of the project. This is where the ranchettes are at. They're kind of those horse properties. They're about an acre, half acre to an acre, depending on which piece you get. Most of the utilities will be in here, inside of feeding these units that the developer's putting in, but there will be some storm and some sewer or some storm and some street improvements going in. And so what this agreement establishes is that if one of these folks that owns the ranchettes wants to subdivide the back half of their property and put a house on it, then they have to pay for a portion of the road and that kind of thing. The way the agreement is written, the easiest way to look at it is on a linear foot, which is right here. Essentially, if someone wants to pay or wants to develop, they have to pay a per linear foot cost. That's a cost that's tied directly to the actual cost the developer's incurring. So they've gotten some firm bids from contractors, as well as they get to recoup some of their property costs as well, as part of this. The other component for this type of an agreement is we do allow them to accrue some interest for 10 years. So if it cost them $10 this year, then they would accrue $10 or 10% interest on that for up to 10 years, and then the amount they could recoup would be capped at that amount. So if a house came in 30 years, they'd still pay the 10-year amount. And the way this one is structured, there's two ways our city allows it to be structured. One is where the city owns the protection strip piece, and one is where the developer owns the protection strip piece. And this is written so the developer will own the protection strip piece. That's a little easier on the city because when someone goes to survey, it shows that gap parcel being in private ownership, and they have to go get a letter from the owner of that property so that it can develop. Any questions for me? And there again, the developer's here. He can answer some things too. Yeah, Carl?
So in real simple terms for me, if I wanted to buy 100 foot of frontage there, it'd be 84 something per foot, like $8,400. And then we'd still have to pay, and then I would still have to pay connection fees.
So you would still pay the city connection fees and impact fees. You just wouldn't have to pay for a new road to go in.
Okay.
The one that we did up in Stonecrest, there was actually sewer, water, storm. There was a lot of infrastructure going in up there, so that the cost per square foot, I think, was $219, if I remember right. This is about $130 per linear foot, plus interest. And our code sets the interest at 10%. And that's just the way our code's written.
Okay. Thank you.
So, John, this doesn't affect any of the property owners that are on the east side of that, where the protected strip's going?
It doesn't force any of them to have to pay the fee or anything. It's just if they ever want to connect to the road in the future, then they have to pay the fee. And so it's only if they want to change the way their lot is configured that they would have to incur the cost. But there's nothing that forces them to pay the money unless they want to do that.
Thank you.
Do you have questions for the developer?
Seems pretty straightforward.
Do you have any comments you want to share with the council?
I can't improve on what you just said.
Okay.
We do this by agreement?
Yeah.
A5-2018.
Any other discussion? Do I have a motion for this one?
Mayor, I'd move that we approve Agreement A5-2018 establishing the Protection Strip Agreement for Cherry Springs Villas as discussed.
It's been moved by Councilman Swanson to approve this agreement.
I'll second it.
I have a second by Councilman Turner. Voting begin with Councilman Severin.
Yes.
Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Councilwoman Fossen.
Yes.
Motion passes. Item 7, discussion or action to consider request for curb and gutter deferral at 1082 East, 2850 North. Presenter Rob Scott.
So Rob actually went home sick,
Oh,
so
bummer.
he asked me to step in. Trying to pull up his picture he's got. So this is, I don't want to call it an infill subdivision. This is right next to to Oakmont or Paramount Estates. Paramount. Let me see if I can turn this the right way. So 2750 or 2850 is the road out here in front of the home, and then this is 1100 East, so it's about a block east of 1050. The deferral is for sidewalk in front of this section right here. Currently, there's a hardscaped turnaround that's there on the property, and this homeowner, as part of the Paramount Estates development, there was a deed restriction imposed on their lot that they had to pay for half of this road, which is a substantial cost, and so they at that time opted to subdivide the back part of their property off, or that's what's being proposed, and that triggers some additional requirements like sidewalk and things, and obviously they'd prefer to do as small amount of improvements as they can because of the costs associated with it, and so, but to get those type of deferrals, they have to come to the council. This is one where with the hardscape out here in front, it's not like people are going to be walking in the dirt. There is sidewalk here and now sidewalk here, but like I said, there's kind of an asphalt between the two. There's just not a curb and gutter. I believe the Michaels here. Yeah, they're in the back. So they can also, in fact, they probably would like to come and talk to you and give you some more details. A lot of this caught them by surprise as far as their requirement to participate, because the title company didn't make it super clear. And anyways, we're just trying to do what we can. And staff doesn't have a firm feeling one way or another. And so the councils, they're not, Rob didn't have a specific recommendation to make other than there's already hard surface, and it's not gonna ruin the world to grant the deferral. So,
John, if my memory serves me correctly, we have granted some of these deferrals in other parcels in the city before for the similar type reasons or.
yeah, and we've never had a parcel where we've granted or where we've been asked for a deferral where there's already some sort of hard surface. In fact, it might be easy to. I'll go back to our handy dandy Google Maps. So if I can get there. So you can see there's a lot of asphalt here already. Obviously this isn't an up-to-date picture, but you can even see there's a little bit of a concrete that goes up to their driveway. But if someone wanted to get from this sidewalk to that sidewalk, they're walking on asphalt to get there. So. So Council Annette was just reminding me that we do have a deferral agreement. So if you're okay with this, we have the standard deferral form that the council approved several years ago when we did our first one up on Loman View Drive for the Rick Scadden property or subdivision that happened on the corner there up in Loman View. And so that would be the same agreement that if the council's okay, we'll bring it back and probably just have it be a quick agenda item on a future agenda to just ratify that and give it an official council agreement number. But like I said, the applicants are here. If you have questions for them, or if they'd like to come up and speak,
It just calls for discussion and or action. Do we need to wait for that agreement to come back before we make an action on it?
You could take the action, and then we'll just bring the agreement back later for you to put a number to. And essentially, it'd give the Michaels some comfort that the council's on board, it's been approved, and then we'll just do the agreement in a couple weeks. It's the same form that we use on every deferral that the city grants, and usually we haven't brought them to the council because I think we haven't typically granted them, with the one exception last week where there was the deferral for the Marsh property. So,
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Thanks. As I considered this, I was thinking back to the two deferrals that we've done in recent years, one just recently with Marsh, where there's no sidewalk on either side. And then with the Scadden property, same thing. We don't know the exact road alignment when that Loman View is going to be widened and improved. And so those were the reasons that we granted the deferrals at that point. We haven't granted any other deferral requests where there was existing sidewalk on both sides or going to be in very near term existing sidewalk on both sides. And this one's a little unique because of the hardscape that's there, the asphalt. But I wonder, do we set a precedent? Are we creating another loophole? I mean, the whole point of the deferral originally back, I think it was in '99, if I remember right from the documents, was that at some point in time, sidewalk, curb and gutter and sidewalk would have to be put in. And if there's development going on to the east of that, and we'll have sidewalk that comes to that property, no sidewalk, agreed, there will be the hardscape. But then sidewalk, curb and gutter to the west of it as well. My thought has been, I don't know why we would defer it, personally. So, my mind isn't set hard in stone, but those are the thoughts I was having as I looked at the property and as I considered what we've done in the past, in the last 2-3 years with sidewalk deferrals. That's where I arrived, so I'm anxious to hear from other council members how they feel.
I'm fine with the deferral. I think
Okay.
you kind of thought that, I
Yeah,
think. So,
yeah.
I'm fine with it, but I see your point. My concern would be if that existing asphalt there meets ADA and things like that, I mean, that are regulated by the by the feds, so, but.
Oh, sure.
But
Mayor, I'd move that we suspend the rules and allow them to speak.
Sure.
So, but anyway, just to get my feeling, I'm okay with it. I mean, it'd be nice to hear Public Works, see what their thoughts are on the plowing and stuff, but, and I understand your point too, but I'm not set either. Anyway, go ahead, gentlemen.
Paul and Rebecca Michael, homeowners, 1082 East, 2850 North. I think our main concern was because of the fact that we just incurred a $35,000 expense on that street next door. We cannot afford to have this done right now. That's why. I mean, I don't have no problem doing it a year or two after we sell our lot, but right now we don't have the money for it. And being it's already developed, as far as the blacktop, like they were saying, I don't see what the problem would be. It's not going to cause, until it does get developed or until we do put the sidewalk in the future, I don't have a problem with it in the future. It's just
not only that, we were told that we have to put an electrical transformer above and beyond just for that one lot. That's another $5,000 that we're having to put out above and beyond putting out for the street and for the utilities to come into the subdivision, the lot that we're subdividing. So that was not, when you look at your budget and you go to buy a car or invest in $40,000, you look at your financial budget, you know that you can afford to put out that money. This was put on as very unexpectedly. This was not within our budget. We're trying to make the best out of this situation. So there's a lot of history into it. I don't know if you really want us to go into that at this point, but we're trying to make the best of this deal. So we just really, again, the money for it this time.
So John, on a deferral like this, can you put a time frame? You'd have to explain that to us.
So the way the deferral agreement is written is that the sidewalk is deferred to a future time, and usually what it says is when the city requires it. So they would be able to put it off until they received an official letter from the city saying, "Hey, we're going to require it to go in." If you wanted to put an automatic time and say it'll be installed within 5 years, we could just build that into the actual agreement.
I have a question for Dave from Public Works. Dave, once the road is extended 2850, right? Yeah, 2850 is extended to the east into the new subdivision, where your plows are not turning around in that, and I would think, are the city plows clearing that circular piece right now?
It goes straight through. This
No,
road
they
goes
go
through all
straight
the way
through
now.
now.
There's a road.
Oh, the road does
these
go.
This is old.
Mm-hmm. And they just ended to put everything at the end of the street. In fact, the last snowstorm, we kind of woke up to a snowplow very unexpectedly. Okay. Kind of unusual sound.
Any negative effects with the plows going through there?
Like you're saying, at one point, that's where they used to turn around, but
right. But they're not turning around there anymore.
And they're not even, it's not a cul-de-sac truck anymore. Now it's big trucks and
it's the big wing truck. Okay.
Mayor, I have a comment.
Yes, go ahead.
I just wonder if we're creating undue burden for a property owner who, it's tricky in these little annexation projects where we have unincorporated area and we have someone who wants to bring in development, but they already have developed to county standards. I just feel like that's maybe a little bit of an undue burden for this property owner where they've already had to pay for the development of a road and shouldered really a heavy cost for that, more than this impact fees. That's my thought about it. So I'm fine with either deferring the sidewalk. It doesn't make sense to do, I think we either defer it altogether or we put a specific date on it, because deferring it to a future date that's not named seems like that would be a horrible surprise sometime in the future also. So I think it either needs to have a specific date that the property owner will eventually develop the sidewalk, or we just defer it altogether and don't require them to put the sidewalk.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
I agree, and part of that is I think the deferral should be granted, but I'm not sure that we need to put a specific time on it. I think there needs to be a reasonable time once the city decides. You can't just drop it in their lap and say, okay, you have to have this done next month. But I don't think there has to be a time frame on it until the city gives notice with a reasonable time to accomplish it.
So what's a reasonable time? I mean, do you give them like 2 years, or I'm just thinking what's a reasonable time to say, hey, I want you to do this project that's going to cost you several $1,000s?
No, I think that's unreasonable. 3 to 6 months. I mean, just be given enough notice to get things in order and go for it.
I mean, obviously, depending on weather up here, whether we would be able to do anything like that, depending on when the notice was
Well,
given.
I'm sure you guys wouldn't expect to do it in the winter anyway, so.
Yeah.
So just, John, just out of curiosity, I don't know if you can answer this, or maybe these folks can. Typically, city owns a foot behind the sidewalk. Do we own that little piece of property, or a little bit of that, or?
So on the current subdivision plat for the Oak Forest subdivision, there's a dotted easement line on the plat, which it doesn't. So we don't own it. It's just a right for our trucks to turn around. There basically is what it is. So it's still owned by the property owners.
Okay.
How far out does the property line come into the street?
So it does. So it is everything to the immediate west of them is the 1 foot behind the sidewalk.
Okay, and what about their property?
So we do own that if it was a straight line headed east and west.
So like where the sidewalk would go along 1 foot behind that line essentially is where the city owns.
Right, I believe, let me pull that plat back up. If you look, try and zoom in on it. So it's a standard 60-foot right-of-way line.
Right.
And so the sidewalk to the neighbors is out here, and the curb is probably down about a third of the way across that in the right-of-way, so.
Well, again, one of my, I'll just bring up what we've done in the past over the last 3 going on nearly 4 years. We've had discussion that one of the issues we have in the city as a whole is that there's been a ton of sidewalk deferrals done, and as a result, we have pockmarks of some sidewalk here and no sidewalk there, and everybody wants a deferral, and everybody's been granted a deferral in the past, and we've ended up with neighborhoods where there is some sidewalk, there isn't sidewalk, and we had made the determination several years ago that except in extreme situations, we would not be granting deferrals. We did it with the Scaddons, again, because we don't know the alignment of the road where the curb and gutter and sidewalk would actually be located. So we deferred that because of that. And then on the Marsh property, again, for similar reasons. I certainly understand, though, that all that said, the expense, and I wouldn't have a problem, a named date in the future, whether that's 3 years or 5 years or something like that. But I think we just continue with the problem that we've had in the city and that we wanted to get away from by having sidewalk all the way to that property from the east, no sidewalk, whether it's blacktop or not, and then sidewalk again starting to the other side. I only bring that up because that's the discussion that we've had in the past about how the city's developed over time, and we're trying to avoid that.
It sounded like you were willing, It sounds like there's a lot that's behind your house that you're preparing to sell.
Yes, to make up the cost of that, pay for that, we paid for that street, yeah, we're.
Pay for that.
Subdividing, and that's the condition of the subdivision. In order to subdivide, they were saying we have to get this approved, or we have to pay to have that taken care of, which is not possible right now, so that would kind of hold us up on our subdivision, and that's the way we're gonna get the money to pay for that, so a deferral would be great, because then we'd be able to afford the street at this time. After paying $35,000 for a street, plus, we had to pay for the utilities and stuff like that, which is, we're in the 40,000 plus and stuff, so it's getting quite costly. So, if they would have put a protective strip for that thing, that would have been great for us. You guys talked about for the last thing, but they didn't do that for us, so we got stuck paying for this.
I like the idea of a 3-year deferral with a specific date. It puts the city in a position that they don't have to be the bad guy 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, and we say, okay, now we want a sidewalk. It would be better if we're going to create a deferral with them that has an expiration date, to know the expiration date before we put the deferral in place. And I agree with Phil. We shouldn't, I understand the not wanting to make exceptions, that we need to be consistent and work towards creating a more walkable city. So I think that's a fair compromise.
How agreeable would you be to like a 3-year?
I'd agree to that.
Okay.
Yeah, we should be able to. I guess we'd have that sold by then. We better have it sold.
We
by
hope.
Then.
Yeah,
one way or another would be sold.
You could
so
do
that
that.
wouldn't be the problem. So.
Well, then I would move that we accept the request for a curb and gutter deferral at 1082 East, 2850 North. Do we have to put an exact date on it, or can we say, John, 3 years from
March of 2021?
March 2021.
But that date would be kind of hard, because the winter, if we have a hard winter, that'd be hard to have it in, right before then.
That's
so,
a good point, too.
Yeah,
So maybe by October of 2021?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll get that agreement. It's the same agreement, so I'll just add that one little provision that says it'll be completed by this date. Make sure the Michaels are okay with it, and then we'll bring it back for a final approval. But this will at least give planning commission or the planning staff the comfortability to move forward and let the engineer know at least they can get a Mylar ready for us before it's signed and recorded.
Snuck up on you. Just out of curiosity, I'm sorry, but do other, having not been here for other deferrals, are other deferrals, are they under the same kind of time constraint, or is it just based on the creation of a new?
Usually the deferrals are for much larger subdivisions.
Okay.
And by much larger, I mean 4-lot, so really not that much bigger, but they're larger, so it's easier to spread the cost out. The one that probably sticks out the most is the Story subdivision that was on 750 East and 2850, same. So just a little bit further to the west, and the council didn't approve that. It basically wrapped around the corner and went up the hill right there at that intersection, and the homes that were put in were required to put sidewalk out, and they're kind of little islands of sidewalk right now.
Yes.
I know before
That's what
we
I was thinking about myself.
Before we decided to subdivide, we questioned it, and we were told that we didn't have to do anything to the thing. We can leave it as it is, but because we're subdividing, that makes us bring up to code, which we weren't aware of, and so that kind of changes. We thought when we decided to do the subdivision is we didn't have to deal with the sidewalk, because that's what we were told. But yeah, then they find out that changes the ordinances, and so it's a big surprise. Another one. This all happened since last May. We
was
found
that
out about
time
this.
frame?
Yeah, the October.
Doable for you guys?
Yeah.
That helps you?
Yeah.
Excellent. Now, do we need to say that again, or is that clear then on the motion? We're good? Okay.
A motion by Councilman Severing,
I'll second it.
second by Councilman Swanson. I begin the vote at Councilman Turner.
Yes, with just a quick question. What if for some reason something happens and they can't put it in? That's an earthquake, or I don't know. Something crazy happens. Can they come and request for an extension on that, or is it pretty set in stone?
There wouldn't be any reason the council couldn't extend it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Councilwoman Stoker?
Yes.
Councilman Swanson?
Yes.
Councilwoman Fossen?
Yes.
Councilman Severy?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming this evening.
Item 8, discussion or action to consider letting the Miss North Ogden pageant become its own 501c3. Presenter is Annette Spenlove.
Mayor and Council, last week we talked a little bit about the Miss North Ogden pageant, and Cheryl Stoker, Councilmember Stoker, and Councilmember Turner and I met this afternoon and discussed some things that that you might consider. One of the ideas was letting the pageant become a 501c3, and the second item we discussed was the name that the pageant could be called, and the three of us came up with an idea, and the two council members agreed that we present this to you, that we let the pageant become a 501c3. And Hannah said last week that they could do that through the Miss America pageant, but she needed a name to do that, and the name that is being suggested is Miss Cherry Days. That would it still be affiliated with our Cherry Days pageant, but then they could incorporate those girls that they would like into that pageant. So, do you have any questions about that?
I'd like to hear from Hannah, who's raising her hand anxiously behind you.
I couldn't see her in the back of my eyes in the back of my head.
Okay, so actually, I met with my board this past week, and we were discussing these things, and we actually were going to propose changing our name because of our guidelines that we have to follow with the Miss America organization. They actually did away with all of the fair and festival titles quite some time ago, and that's, I think, why we originally changed from Miss Cherry Days to Miss North Ogden. And so in talking with my board, we had thought up the idea of changing our name to Miss Northern Utah. And we would love to still be involved with the North Ogden City. I mean, I think that's the heart of the organization and the legacy that we have kind of had this for so many years, but we feel like that would kind of relieve the city of any liability or kind of worrying about that, but we would still like to be involved in the Cherry Days celebration and parade and, you know, in North Ogden City as a whole. So
Well, when you say Miss Northern Utah, doesn't that encompass a lot of cities?
it could,
and a lot of
but we, because as a director, I can kind of put limitations on who can participate. Just because you're Miss Northern Utah doesn't mean that you have to take every person in Northern Utah. We can put limitations on.
Doesn't Cache Valley have Miss Cache Valley, and there's Miss Tremont?
There's a Miss Bear River Valley. But as a director, I can put limitations on our area that we are drawing girls from. It's just kind of giving a name to the organization. But like I said, we would love to have a city that backs us. I think that's so important for the young women to feel like they are a part of a city or an organization that they're representing and serving, and it kind of gives them a home base and something to talk about at Miss Utah at their interview. So,
Well, I see the wisdom, but darn it, we keep losing things like Miss North Ogden Cherry Day.
How about Miss Ben Lomond?
Miss Ben Lomond.
Ben Lomond High School.
North Ogden area, like Miss North Ogden area.
Miss Barrett Canyon.
What'd you say?
Miss Barrett Canyon. That's right in the mouth of Ben Lomond. I mean, most people probably don't even know that there's a canyon called Barrett's Canyon in the mouth of Ben Lomond. So, Miss Coldwater. I just hate losing. I hate losing Miss North Ogden.
Yeah, I do too. But
we're just.
I mean, if we're turning it over to them,
I know,
and you can limit I mean, I don't think what we'd want to see is people from Tremont coming down here, but it could happen.
a 501c3.
Right, they do what they
you have
want.
No say
Right.
in who's involved in it.
But then does that keep her from being able to?
This organization has that say.
Oh, this organization still
I
has
will
the
say-
say to say.
I will say, though, that I have a very deep love for North Ogden City, and as a former title holder, it's something that I would like to continue the legacy here
You
in
won't
this city.
always be the director of this. At some point, you won't be the director. And although we'd love you to always be the director.
Hey,
but
I will probably be the director till I die if it was up to me, but it's, we'll see. But I think that based on the people that we have involved in the organization, our board members, because most likely if I were to give it up at some point, which is not going to happen for a very long time, it would probably go to one of our board members. And I think that we all have a very strong tie to North Ogden City, the Miss North Ogden program. We would not want to see it go astray or anything. We want to give North Ogden City a really great name.
Would there be a reason not to continue to call it Miss North Ogden? And just expand its boundaries?
I think we just wanted to release you from the liability or having to worry about us or anything like that.
That gives us any liability, does it, John?
Well, I think if you're just using the name,
just using
John,
the
that
name,
doesn't put us
you'll
under
set
any
the
liability or responsibilities or financial or anything like that?
Nope.
And that, if we make it you said that she can't become a 501c3 until she has a name. If we say, yeah, make it a 501c3, why should we even have to give them her name?
That's part of what Miss America wanted her to do. That's what.
But
one of the
that she could come up with her own name. She could call it Miss Hannah. In all honesty, couldn't she? She could call it.
You could call it anything.
Yeah,
once she's
so,
a 501c3.
Because once it's a 501c3, it's not under our jurisdiction, and it's not under.
She's just suggesting this out of her goodness to North Ogden.
So.
Well, I think mostly too, I think we just really want to stay involved if we can. It's hard kind of severing the last final tie financially. And so, I think we would just want to be able to support the city in any way we can, have our title holders come and help with anything and kind of still have a little bit of that tie to something that's been so amazing for so many years.
Well, I don't want to cause any controversy, so I apologize for that. But I just hate to see everything that was part of North Ogden just completely be gone. So there's a part of me that, and the other council members may disagree, but it's just nice to have Miss North Ogden still, instead of becoming Miss Generic.
I don't think
that's my fault.
I don't think Miss Generic's a very good word.
It's not, but that's what I'm trying to imply.
I think once you let it go as a 501c3, then you don't have any say. It's now theirs, and we, and nothing stays the same.
And I'm okay with it. In fact, my first thought was having to be Miss North Ogden, and then we discussed it just because of liability and maybe Miss Cherry Days, but I'm all for Miss North Ogden.
Yeah, and then of course down the road you do what you want, right?
So why are we having this discussion?
I have a question. So does Miss
She
America?
can't get the 501c3 without a name.
She can call it Northern.
Right, she can
Does
call it
Miss
what she wants.
America, their guidelines state that it can't be affiliated with an event?
That's what my understanding is. I think that's why we
get
originally.
That? Can we understand?
Yeah, I can look.
Is
I
there
can.
information that
I
we
can
can
contact
have?
the Miss Utah organization and see if
they
can
send
get
us
that
a copy of
information.
those guidelines?
Mhm. Yeah.
Just Annette, just maybe explain to us. So we give the blessing to do a 501c3. We already have money in our budget for Cherry Days. We probably will have money in our budget coming up, but we'll fund Miss North, Miss Cherry Days or Miss North Ogden, whatever it is, not Miss Generic. It's going to be called. Would we? What's the process there? Would we give the money to the 501c3?
Would go to the 501c3.
Okay. But then they could hit up Pleasant View and Plain City and
whatever they
get
however
grants.
they decide to raise money for that.
And council, just to be clear, it's not actual tax dollars that are being handed over. It's just the donations have been collected by the city, and handed out to the
Yeah, we've always,
organization.
for the past 5 years since I've been involved, we are completely sponsor based, and so all of the money that is, I guess, in our account or whatever you want to call it, has been raised by us through donations, sponsors, that kind of a thing.
And Hannah was a big part in bringing this pageant back because we canceled it for several years because of finances.
Mhm.
So, and she was a big part in bringing it back. If you don't remember that, and so she's pretty passionate about it. It sounds like.
So Hannah, will all this actually be held in North Ogden?
This year, like I said last week, yes, always going forward. This year we had a little bit of an issue with Weber High School because of their air situation, and so we'll actually be holding it at Fremont High School this year just because we had no other choice and we didn't have a big enough budget to contact a professional theater. And so, but moving forward, we would like to continue having it at Weber High School in the area.
Well, can I for one just say I would sure like to see it. I don't have any problem with a 501c3, but I would sure like to see something remain Miss North Ogden. I mean, you just give things to these internet, national kinds of. Let's just stay North Ogden, Anyhow.
We're open to that, yeah.
I'm sorry, just personal feelings.
I like Miss North Ogden. I think that's.
Yeah, I like the tradition of it, but also recognize that once you're on your own, which could be next year or 100 years, right, from now, that you change it to something else. So, I mean, if you're open to Miss North Ogden, I think it'd be great. Oh, and it looks like we lost Sarah, so I'm going to redial.
So do we need to make a motion to let him go to 501c3 or what? I mean,
And
That would-
to use the name Miss North Ogden, if they want to.
Well, I move that we approve the pageant to become its own individual 501c3 with the encouragement that Miss North Ogden, if possible, stay in the title.
I'll second that.
Been moved by Councilman Severine. It's been seconded by Councilman Turner. Again, with voting with Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes, with the note that things do change.
And just a quick question, I guess. I know you're probably finalizing everything, but because of this change, will we still be able to be involved with North Ogden's events? I mean, as far as like the parade and using the building for our practices and that kind of a thing.
The float.
And yeah, the float.
Absolutely.
I mean, are those things that you would like to be involved with? Well, we promise to keep it, very professional like always, and we love North Ogden City and want to represent well, so.
Next vote, Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Councilwoman Fossen.
May I just clarify, are we voting to approve Mr. North Ogden change to the 501c3 for Miss Northern Utah?
No.
Or perhaps keeping Miss North Ogden as the title.
Okay, then my vote is yes.
Councilman Severine.
Yes.
Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next item is discussion on cul-de-sac length. Presenter is Councilmember Fossen.
Mayor and council, thank you for allowing me to participate tonight remotely. Dr. Mackley, you probably noted in the public comments, is bringing a request before the city to consider possibly extending the length of cul-de-sacs, especially in an area that's kind of a fill-in area. Dr. Mackley, if he is still present, he certainly probably can give comment or answer questions, but the proposal is, or the consideration for discussion is really about, an area that's already developed, somewhat developed as a county area, a very rural setting, and considering adopting standards that are more consistent with the International Fire Code that allow cul-de-sacs to, the measurement is not on the number of feet, but on the number of homes in the cul-de-sac. And so is Dr. Mackley still present in the audience?
He's not.
Okay. So I don't know what the consideration is for the council, if this would be something they would consider for, you know, I don't know if this is like a blanket solution for the entire city, or if this is just the solution we're looking for more of a rural solution. To me, it seems like this is really reasonable for a rural solution. On his particular property, if you were following the current requirements in order to annex portions of his property or annex all of the property, he would have to basically build a little stub road, so it'd basically be a little corner road that ends and doesn't go anywhere, that eventually could connect up to Monroe Boulevard if Monroe Boulevard went through. But there are many other roads around there, and I think it becomes cost prohibitive for them to move forward with annexation. So that was really his concern. I know Far West City just adopted the International Fire Code recommendation for cul-de-sac lengths, and I'm just interested in the discussion and thoughts from the council if this is something they'd be interested in taking action on, or what discussion and thoughts you have about it.
Questions from the council?
I'd be interested to hear from our fire marshal, who happens to be here.
And also, Dr. Mackley's engineer is here as well,
Oh, wonderful.
so he can answer questions as well.
Let's start with Fire Marshal Barker. Tell us your thoughts and feelings about this. From what I understand, the extension would be, what, 225 feet, is that correct, to the existing cul-de-sac? Am I understanding it correctly, or at the end of that stub road there?
I think that I thought it was 250. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me look at his notes. It's right in that neighborhood.
So it makes a total length how much? About 850
Is that
feet.
there, John? 700 feet?
It's about
700.
About 800 feet.
And 50.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm actually pretty familiar with the fire code right now, and this issue we're dealing with it in Pleasant View as well. Yes, the fire code says you can put 30 houses on one access, but if you look two paragraphs above, it says there's a chart that says for a cul-de-sac length is maximum 750 feet. Anything more than 750 feet needs special permission. And with Pleasant View, I stated Northview Fire is never given special permission. We say follow city standards. So it's basically on Northview Fire's position is we don't want long cul-de-sacs, but if the city wants it.
So the international code says 750 feet?
No, the International Fire Code says 750 feet is maximum cul-de-sac length.
Okay, or 30 houses.
Well, yeah, you're not going to get 30 houses on one cul-de-sac. That's so if you have one access going in, it can branch off, but you still only have one access coming out.
Right.
So yeah, think of it like a P shape.
Right.
If that would be a
So
a single
actually,
access.
his development would meet the International Fire Code of 750 feet.
Yeah, very close, yeah.
So, John, it seems like, and you may, I think, I don't know if you're here or not, but several years ago along 2600, just, the road goes to Oak Lawn Park, across the street from there, there was a cul-de-sac that went down and then made a left and ended down there, and we made a exception there. I want to say that one may be 900 feet total, but that we made an exception just for that one because there was really no other way to develop that piece of property also. And so,
Are you talking about?
yeah, right there.
Right there.
That subdivision right there. It seems like that one was like 900 feet, and we made an exception for that. And the big discussion we did have is part of it is the time it takes a fire truck to get down to that that area, or emergency personnel. It takes them longer, and more bad stuff can happen, I guess, is what the extent of it is. So how many feet was that?
It's about 860.
So
yeah.
So anyway, I do remember we made an exception to that one. So
I think it's reasonable to make him, in that area, the cul-de-sac you're talking about, I know right where that is. I just think it's reasonable to consider, and that one is the same thing. It's filling in an area where it is that was already kind of had some surrounding homes around it. And so in order to develop the area, you had to take some extra consideration. This Dr. Mackley's property is a very unique property, in that he has one very big estate home. They're not seeking to put 30 homes there. Putting the road in would limit them, like it would be hard for them to fit more than one home. I think they're in consideration of maybe putting 2 homes. So it's not a huge number of residences, and I believe it does fit within the International Fire Code. So I feel like it's reasonable to change. I don't know that we want to change it, or if we're making an exception for this one property, or if this is something, if adopted, I'd be interested in, how would the fire marshal feel in these areas that we're incorporating county islands into the city, giving a cul-de-sac allowance in those cases of 750 feet consistent with the International Fire Code.
Our recommendation is, and I talked to the chief about this, we've talked at length, we recommend follow your city standards. And that's why Far West got rid of this cul-de-sac length, and that's why their fire marshal's not enforcing it, because they don't want to follow this. They don't want to enforce it on rural communities. But in this area, my only issue is there's 2 stub roads already there. One on the north end of the property, and then one right where the Mackley's property comes off. I drove over there and looked at it, and at the end of his stub road, he has a fence, he fenced off the road. So I would like to know more. Is he just not wanting to tear down his own fence, or I don't know. That road looks. What is it? It looks like it was designed to extend into that area where he's talking about removing that to extend that cul-de-sac.
Mm-hmm. I don't know.
So that's what I say. This is the first I've seen I haven't seen the development plans yet. I just read the letter that came in the packet that was online, but without an official opinion, I want to see more. I want to know more reasons why we don't want to just connect these roads that are designed to be connected. Because there's even that road on the north end that's a stub road into that property.
Where's that? Oh, right there by the. So my I don't want to make a sweeping rule to say, okay, yeah, we can make the cul-de-sacs this length throughout the city, but to consider outcrops, kind of like we did that other property. I don't have a problem considering this. This one here, I'd need to think a little bit more about and stuff. But that's my initial take on it. Is I don't want to say, because I think our city code says 600 feet.
Yep.
Is that's what it says right now, and we had a long discussion about that when we did that long. It was several weeks of discussion that we had, and we had the fire department come in and everything at that time. So need to digest this one a little bit for me to.
And that's I want to see the plans, see what is proposed, instead of just guessing.
So I think that's a really reasonable next step. So maybe we table this agenda item for tonight with, or do we need to make a proposal to have the plan presented, and then who needs to sign off on this for the council to feel good about it? I mean, we definitely want input from the fire marshal. Do we need to do some review of the plan also? What makes this?
I'd like to hear from the Mackley's engineer. He's here, and maybe he can give us some additional, but I think the fire marshal brings up some good questions that we'd like to know more about before we try to make a decision on this.
I appreciate the opportunity. Some of the maps didn't get put in your packet, and I think they're critical. That's why I passed out these maps. And the very first sentence says, we are doing this in a somewhat limiting specific condition. I think Councilman Turner brought up a good point. The first line says, we're seeking a cul-de-sac length extension in an infill environment that already has adequate area circulation. I think it's important to realize that this isn't some kind of appendage. We've all seen leapfrog developments that go way out in the county, and they just have one long road. I'm saying this is a pocket within the city that isn't in that environment at all. So take a look at your map, and you can see the site listed on it, and you can see 1850 to the north, 800 east and 850 east on the east side, 1700 north on the south, and the Monroe Boulevard. So this area is blanketed by a total circular loop of 5 roads. I think that puts it in a whole different perspective. So it's not like this is some kind of island out in the middle of nowhere that there's no other roads to get to this area. So that's kind of the gist of it. On the very next sheet is the far west length. It used to be 400 feet. Go ahead.
Can I ask you a question? I know you're pointing at all these other roads, but none of these other roads are connecting to it. Are they eventually going to or not?
Well, that's what we're saying tonight. We're saying the virtues of having a slightly longer cul-de-sac to 850 feet or something like that, just like 2475, wherever that road, 2675 west, the virtues of having that cul-de-sac are sufficient due to the area environment in which it's located. And so it is a very qualifying thing. Now, just to say, the fire code Far West did adopt the 30-unit parameter, and in the next page is the actual code. The 30 units in the highlighted area, this is from the International Fire Code, applies to single-family units. If you go right up to section D106, it applies to multifamily units, and that can be like up to 100 or 200, depending on certain access parameters. And the fire marshal did speak to the page before this that does speak to, I will acknowledge, it says 750 feet or by special permission. And so that's what we're asking for tonight, marrying all these things together. There are different asserted interpretations of this, as you can imagine, right? You can kind of perceive that right now. The next page is just to give you a general idea of what's being proposed. Basically, a 7-lot subdivision. There's an awkward appendage going to the west that will be it's a kind of like a, it's a weird half-street dedication, 25 feet on one side, 34 feet on the other side. And it butts up very closely to a house already that's there. You can see the presence of the streets all around this. Admittingly, the proposal we have tonight would not be a connector. 2675 West doesn't connect to anything. But this proposal has even better area circulation than that. Is
2675 West?
Yeah, that was that one that was just
north.
North.
North. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay, that makes better sense.
You're right.
Thank you.
So I'm trying to take all these factors into consideration. One, it's been done before, and if a leap to 30 units is too much of a leap, what we'd like to do is have a case-specific consideration tonight for this exact wording, an infill environment that has adequate area circulation. And because of that, you've done it before in your city. This has even better area circulation than, thank you, 2675 North. We think it's a decent compromise, frankly.
And council, just to be clear, there's not a current ability to waive this requirement in the land use code as it's written. So if you're in favor of this type of a thing, we would have to send it to the Planning Commission for a text amendment and a public hearing, and then it'd come to you for a text amendment and a public hearing in a month or two. So it's not something that would happen instantaneously.
So John, is that something that that's if we wanted to change the language for all of it? If we wanted to do it just for this specific piece of property, would it be the same process?
Yeah, what it would fall under is a special exception, and our code currently says that a special exception can't be granted for cul-de-sac length. So we would need to amend the text to increase the length and add the parameters, for these type of situations we'll increase it. So.
Well, I'm just, for my I'm not opposed to consider this, but I just want to look at some of the other parameters, kind of what Mr. Barker said, and then also kind of get the feedback from the other council. And I'd like to hear from the Planning Commission too, kind of see what they think. We just kind of get a feedback on all of it. Again, I'm not opposed to it. I just not sure if I like it.
I appreciate the open and candid consideration. It's one of those borderline things that I think common sense says it's probably not that big of a deal, but there are parameters.
Unintended consequences.
Yeah.
It appears that this needs further work then from our planning staff.
Yep.
So we'll proceed with that.
We don't want to venture too far out, but we have spoken with staff, and it's an inherent staff position to assert the ordinance. And so the reason we're in front of you tonight is to venture an opinion from City Council, not just an asserted opinion from staff asserting the ordinance. And
so I think what he's saying is it would be helpful for Planning Commission and staff in modifying the ordinance to see the council say you're okay with 750 feet or the 30 units or, and obviously it's not an action, but it would be helpful to maybe voice some opinions on what type of things you might see as a consideration that the staff can write into the ordinance with the Planning Commission. Right, Jim?
I appreciate it, because I think staff and Planning Commission their duty is to assert the ordinance. We're saying this, I think this is a consideration that goes above just the ordinance. I don't fault staff, I don't fault Planning Commission for not going beyond it. But if you think that's the better avenue for an extension, we would
For
certainly
me, I think there's just
that.
too many unanswered questions to say one way or the other. It would be easy to say, yeah, it makes sense, but I'm not a builder. I'm not the fire marshal. I'd like to hear the opinions of the Planning Commission, the fire marshal, as to both sides of the issue. Yes and no. Why not? And I'd like to hear more from our fire marshal as to why they would prefer that we stuck to the 600 feet, and from Planning Commission, and get more information. That's where I'd like to be.
It appears that this needs further study.
So should we make a motion to, in consideration, just the possibility of making an exception for a cul-de-sac length extension, to have review from the Planning Commission and the fire marshal and revisit this issue at a future time at a next council meeting or planning commission meeting?
I'd say no, because there's too many unanswered questions to consider something what we don't know the unforeseen consequences.
So how do we
I'm
get
not comfortable
to
with
the
it.
question? That's the path. Is how do we have a discussion? You know, tonight is just about opening a discussion on this issue that is brought before us from one of our residents. So how do we present a discussion that helps us feel comfortable one way or the other and give an answer to this resident who's requesting our consideration? I think having a planning commission discussion and a planning commission report about it would be beneficial. The fire marshal some time to review the specific property also would be beneficial. So,
If we came back in a month and had reports from those individuals, is that what you're thinking, Councilwoman Fossen?
yes, and unfortunately, I will not be there, so it would be up to the council to continue the discussion, but hopefully we have some more answers to questions and be able to feel comfortable one way or the other. Is this a reasonable exception or is it not a reasonable exception? So I propose that consideration of amending the ordinance.
In my mind, we've had the discussion, and my consensus is that we need more answers, and then we'll come back and have further discussion.
I think that's what she's proposing, is that we hear.
Then what did she say? Simple.
What's that?
Nothing.
That's what I understand she's proposing, is that we come back in a month's time and we hear from the engineer, we hear from the fire marshal, we hear from the planning commission. I think that would give us time to have all of those entities study it out the way they need to give us their thoughts and recommendations, and then as a council, we could discuss it further.
I think you're right, Phil, and in that time, John, and maybe, I don't know if this is something you or Annette, or I don't want to create more work, but when we approve that other cul-de-sac, could we find any planning commission meeting minutes or council meeting minutes that for us to, Blake asked me why it was approved, and I honestly don't remember. Other than there was an exception there that because of the length, and maybe we could, because there was a lot of discussion there involved. In fact, I think at that time, I think Northview was still part of the city at that time. I don't think they were a district at that time, so I think it was, Chief Four was involved. So,
John, we can do that. We get that information on that 2675.
Yeah, I'm sure we can probably, we can find when that subdivision was approved, and then we'll look at meeting minutes before that to find it.
That would be awesome.
The biggest question I have for the council is, if you want to be able to make a final decision on this, when it comes back to you, then there would need to be time for the planning commission to have a public hearing, make a recommendation. Then the council can do the same thing. If we just come back with here's what we talked about, then council would have to give some guidance, then it would go back and start that process with the public hearings again. So I just want to make sure that staff understands what you're asking, whether you want some quick research brought back to you the beginning of next month, or if you want a actionable ordinance brought back to you next month, or it might be the months after.
I think we need discussion more than that before we need an ordinance. I mean, I don't know if it's 2 weeks or a month, but I think we need more discussion. I mean, I think it has a bigger sweeping impact than just this one cul-de-sac. I don't know how the rest of you feel, but that's kind of my thought.
I'm with Carl. I wouldn't want to go through the effort of writing the ordinance.
Okay.
When we don't know whether or not that's even a direction we want to go. That's me personally.
Okay.
I think to be fair to the Mackleys, I think we need to look at that information on 2675.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So, okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for your discussion.
Info, John?
Very much.
Yes, that's good.
Next item is on restricting housing development at Barker Park. Presenter is Phil Swanson, council member.
Yes. This has been an issue going on for how long? Where are the Barkers? There's Steve, Peggy, Scott. Good to see you guys. Long time. Very, very long time. And it has, boy, I think it's been it's a festering thorn in the side of the city and the residents as a whole. I believe in the development of Barker Park, we have well gone past the point, and again, I'm speaking for myself here, that we've gone well past the point where anybody in their right mind would ever think about subdividing additional lots off there and building homes. We have talked about selling those development rights to somebody else for density somewhere else in the city. Frankly, unless John correct me, but I believe we could, if a developer came along and said, "Hey, I'd like more density than what we could horse trade at that point." I mean, that's essentially what we'd be doing with the development rights, correct?
Yeah, it's called the transferable development right.
Right.
And the state requires that you have an ordinance that affects that and says, here's the giving areas and here's the receiving areas. But
if a developer wanted to donate X number of amount of work to the Barker Park development in exchange for some higher density, we could do that as a council.
Yeah, it would just need to be tied to an ordinance.
We'd tie it to an ordinance. So I don't know, as I've spoken to others, that there is any longer any reason not to have a conservation easement on Barker Park. I know that before a conservation easement proposal was made for all parks in the city, and I think that's a bit overreach and a bit strong. But I am in favor of the city entering into a conservation easement agreement for Barker Park. Spoken with John earlier this week, and essentially the difference between, we've talked about deed restrictions, we've talked about conservation easements. Each can be written to accomplish what the other does. So, I mean, I was concerned for a while about the title. Conservation easement, I had some misunderstandings about what a conservation easement did and what we could do under that. So the purpose of having it here tonight is to have that discussion amongst us as council members as to whether or not that's the direction we want to go. It's a direction I want to go, and I hope that the rest of you are with me, but I can't think of any reasons that we've had in the past for hanging on to that possibility. I don't see that it accomplishes anything. And frankly, I think we can fund the park and get it built without having to subdivide, or there are discussions that I'm having, that Councilman Severing is having with private people here, individuals in the community, that we may be able to get some things done here. So that's my piece.
May I add, I'm very much in favor of the conservation easement.
When we were in the planning of the park, when it was the plan was put down and all of this, never once was there housing to go on 2600. That was never part of the park. It's always been shut down that this would be used for housing on 2600. So I want to make that known right from the start.
Agreed, and you're absolutely correct. There hasn't been any, site designing or conceptual designing of having homes along 2600, but I think it's been a lingering cloud, kind of a Damocles sword hanging over the park, over the Barker family, over the community as a whole, that if not us, some council in the future may decide to snip that string and let the sword fall, and I would hate to see that happen. On behalf of the Barkers, I'd hate to see it happen. On behalf of the community and what that park will be when it's finished, I'd hate to see that happen. And again, I think it's time to eliminate the sword. I think it's time to take the cloud away and enter into that agreement. And we have ways of negotiating with builders to help get that part completed.
So, this is probably a question for Phil, because Phil, you were against a conservation easement at one time. And so, back on, when I was on city council before, back 2010 or 11 or whatever it was, when we talked about having a conservation easement on Barker Park, our understanding from our then attorney was that it had to be held by a separate entity, a 501c3 separate entity, and that was part of the hangup of why that didn't get done, is because the 501c3 had to be established and had to have a certain parameters, a time frame, and they hold it, and then they let it lapse, and so I mean, so I don't know, is that still true, or
what I'm understanding, and John, please step in here. It doesn't necessarily have to be tied to a 501c3. Is that correct?
It doesn't have to. It's just a matter of, like Phil said, I think the things can be written however you'd like to write it, or however, and we can make it accomplish the same goal without transferring an easement to, like, the state. The state has an entity that holds conservation easements. It kind of specializes in agricultural conservation easements, but we could write something that would not necessarily require it to be transferred to a. Essentially what you'd do is you'd name some beneficiaries, and it could either be an individual or something like that. So there's ways to do it without actually signing, hey, this is an easement and it's now owned by this person. It's kind of a different approach, if that makes sense.
So what's the difference between that and a deed restriction?
Honestly, there's not much.
It's all in how it's written.
So you'd still have to have somebody hold a deed restriction, or does the county record? I mean, I don't know how all that works.
So yeah, there is someone who holds the deed restriction.
Okay, so no matter what, someone's going to have to hold this.
Mm-hmm.
And give me an example of when you say an individual. I mean, what do you mean? Could the city, as an incorporated city, be the individual who holds it, or?
So the only thing you can't do is typically have the same person grant the easement as holds the easement, or grant the restriction as holds the restriction, because there's a doctrine called the doctrine of merger, where as soon as those two groups are the same, then all their ownership vests in the title to the property. So what you could do is you could say the easement's owned, or whatever, it's held by the governor of Utah. And even though the governor would change, it's always a specific person. Typically what they'll do, though, is they can tie an easement to a group like the governor's office, or tie it to, they might give it to Utah State University, or, it's typically a company like that if it's not tied to a specific piece of property.
Hey, you're back on. We keep losing Councilwoman, and we just lost her again. Keep discussing.
So just, when before I wasn't opposed to the conservation easement, because I hadn't even really heard of one went before on the Barker Park, and this was several years ago, and then we got the 501c3 set up, and then that failed, or whatever, paperwork didn't get filed or something. I can't remember all the details there, and that could probably tell us. But anyway, and that was going to be the Parks and Trails. If I remember right, the Parks and Trails and Open Land was going to hold that easement, and then that kind of fell through the cracks, and so we just need to make sure it's somebody.
Let's try that one more time.
That 501c3, they didn't do the paperwork on it, but they are a 501c3 now.
Probably tell us, but
we're here.
Okay.
One of the thoughts I had and questions that I had asked John during the week was, could we tie this to one of the suggestions John had given me was to tie it to, how did you word it, John? The last living descendant of you. I don't remember exactly how you
could do the last living descendant of Ryan Barker, for example.
Okay.
So
we could tie it to the last living descendant, which will go on for millennia, right? But we could tie it, we could do a conservation easement and tie it to the last living descendant of the two Barker families that sold the property to us.
Yeah,
Ray and Lorna, Carl and Fern, is that? Carl and Lorna, Ray and Fern. Okay.
It's a little more technical because there's an obscure rule. I don't want to bore you with it, but essentially you can't let it go forever unless you give it to an entity that survives forever.
Okay.
So if you're picking a descendant of the Barker family, then what you do is you'd say the oldest living descendant when of
George Bush was president or something.
No, the Forest Service makes it 100 years.
But you'd say the youngest. You could say like the youngest Barker when. This is so much fun.
The Forest Service makes it 100 years.
Yeah.
When the last living relative or when 100 years are up, it's done.
And so you just have to tie.
it that way?
What you do is you tie it to a living person right now, and so you'd say when. Now I shouldn't use anyone I'll use me as an example. When when John Call dies, the last or the youngest or the last surviving Barker resident that's alive when John Call dies. Does that make sense?
So when you die, the youngest person alive at the time when they die, the easement goes away.
You just tie it to Weber County.
Yeah, it's easier to give it to you could give it to the county or
A Barker Corporation.
But
Or you
if
just
it
do
gets
100 years.
terminated, then
Yeah,
it's
if the
gone.
Corporation survives.
Unless they shut it down.
Unless they shut it down.
Yeah, so that's anyways,
I like Cheryl's idea
You
doing
just
it
do
like
100 years.
the Forest Service.
Yep, that's how they do it. When whichever comes first, 100 years or the last living resident.
we
Then
can explore all those options. I mean, it sounds like what the council wants is for it to last as long as we can make it last.
Yeah.
Let me
That's my feeling.
I'll just put in I'm okay with something like this. I mean, just because there's been concerns and stuff in the past. I don't know if the agreement we have with that when we bought the property that if it's needed, but to ease everybody's mind and to make peace with everything. I think this is something that is good, and I'm okay moving forward with something like this. I don't know because I had the same impression as a conservation easement that it wasn't the right avenue, but if it is the right avenue, I'm fine with it.
What my initial objection a number of years ago with the conservation easement was that I was under the impression that the city would lose control over how the park was developed. And that would be in the hands of a separate group, whoever carried the easement. And I've been corrected that that's not the case. We would still have the ability to build the park as we've talked about. But the easement that would be preventing the sale of lots and the building of homes would go as long as this easement existed.
So my only concern with this is it happens again, that it fails. And because as a city council, before we voted on it, and the Barkers can attest this, we voted on it, we all wanted to have it, and we got the ball rolling. We had some things helping externally. Our attorney got a different job, and some other things happened there in the mix, and it kind of, the ball got dropped. I'm not blaming the staff at all. In fact, I was on the Parks and Trails organization when we became the 501c3, and I was on it when paperwork didn't get filed either, so maybe blame me, I don't know. But it's just, I don't want it to happen again.
I think we've reached a point, my feeling, that we've reached a point in the city where nobody wants to see that happen again. I don't think we as a council would allow that to happen. I think we can do this in relatively short order, John, and get this back to us. What's the timeline, do you think?
I've actually got a copy of the easement that had been put together by the previous attorney.
Okay.
So most of the heavy lifting is done. It would just be a matter of tweaking the language to fit what the council wants.
When do you think you could bring it back for us to review and possibly decide?
Probably the beginning of April, given the meeting constraints that are, I don't think we've got a meeting or, budget.
So, John, can we actually make a movement on this one, or do we have to
It's
wait for a
discussion
motion?
only tonight.
Just discussion.
So,
only?
may I make a comment?
Yeah.
Mayor?
What's that?
So I think there's really good intent here in wanting to preserve this as a natural space, a park space. This goes well above and beyond the agreements that were made with the Barker families. And my only concern that I just want to voice here, and then you're going to move forward in the way you want to, is that we are binding future councils. I really agree with Councilman Turner when he says, well, what if things don't work out? If we could the process to develop this as a park and then things change in the city and the city doesn't want, we're unable to move forward with a portion of this property being developed? Or what if the city is in financial straits and needs to sell the property or a portion of the property to another party? As long as we are following the original agreement that the city made with when they purchased the properties, I'm actually not in favor of creating additional restrictions because we're meeting the requirements of the agreement and we're limiting the city's ability to act in the future if we needed to act in a different way for this property. So that's just my thoughts as you're considering this issue is to think, right now, smooth some rough waters, but is it really the right choice long term where you're limiting people, leaders of the city, from making decisions that they may need to make? So that's my 2 cents.
Any other comment?
Well, I was just going to say, maybe, I appreciate Council Fossen's thoughts, but it's been too long now. We need to put this in stone. It needs to be done. And heaven help the city council that ever thought in the future that they would want to build build homes on that property, personally myself.
Yeah, I'm with Councilman Fossen in that I generally, in fact, this would be the first time I think that I would vote in favor of when it comes to us doing something that would bind future council's hands, but I think this is a unique enough issue and one that affects the city as a whole to a degree that I'm willing to take that step and have future council members yell at me if it comes to that.
Other comments?
So I guess the only question is, John, you'll, in a month or less, you'll bring us something that we can look at. And
yep.
And one thing I'd request is someone to hold that conservation easement, somebody to give us a good suggestion on who to, and it sounded to me like Ryan Barker was the guy. So
I heard Utah State University.
You're welcome.
Okay. That's the way we'll proceed then, is you come back with the information we need.
The second meeting in April? Are we meeting? What is the date for that? Because the first one will be a work session.
It'd be the 10th of April.
The 10th, shall we set that as a target to have it back?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, April 10th.
Let's proceed that way.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for your comments. And item 13, discussion or act. We'll bypass 12 because
that was
time limit tonight.
By 11.
Oh, sorry. I checked off 11 too quick. Must be getting late. Discussion or action to consider resolution authorizing the appointment of a temporary justice court judge.
So council, this is a formality in the sense that we just have to do this every so often as the judges change. So the way this ordinance has been written, or this resolution, currently Judge Lambert is our judge over here at the police station, handles all of our misdemeanors and some of the lower felonies that we now handle in the city. He does occasionally like to take a vacation, and so when he does that, he needs to have a temporary judge sit in on the hearings that day when he's out of town. And so this just authorizes, essentially, who it lists are the other judges who are at the same level that he is, as the other Judge West and some of the others around who do the same work for other cities. So we just, if you're okay with that, we would recommend from the staff that you approve this, and then the judge can just find a replacement based on who's available on the week he's out of town, or the weeks.
Any other questions or discussions?
Is there a resolution number?
01-2018.
Will you wait? Mayor, I'd move that we approve Resolution 01-2018, appointment of a temporary justice court judge as discussed.
Second.
Motion has been made by Councilman Swanson and seconded by Councilwoman Stoker. Any other discussion? It's a long way down the corridor here. I'll be the next one is Councilman Swanson?
Yes.
Councilwoman Fossen?
Yes.
Councilman Severing?
Yes.
Councilman Turner?
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker?
Yes.
Motion passes. Item 12, we will bypass this evening for a future financial retreat that we'll hold in another week. Next item is item 13, discussing an action to consider the proposal for Weber County Island annexation. Presenter is John Call.
So, Council, this is one that you've, I'm sure, are aware of. The law changed a year ago and allowed for lack of a better word, a fast-track process to happen for annexations into the city. The way it works is the county surveys all the islands, and it has to be an island, so a piece of ground that's surrounded on all sides by incorporated city, and then the county makes a recommendation on which parcels should be subject to this fast-track ordinance, and then they pass their resolution or their ordinance. And then it comes to the city, and the city doesn't have to accept them all. The city only has to accept the parcels. They can accept all of them. They could accept one of them. They could accept a few of them. There's no time limit on it either, meaning we could take action now. We could do it in a year. We could do it in several years, as long as the county doesn't. So the type of places we're talking about, in fact, I'll just bring up the one that we've been discussing this evening already. So this is the Mackley parcel we've been talking about. And so there's this piece here that the Mackleys would like to develop into that subdivision. You know, here's that cul-de-sac. And in theory, what this does is it eliminates the time for a notice and hearing as well as the expense. Typically, when someone's trying to bring a piece of property into the city, it costs them about $900 is probably the cheapest, and upwards of $2,000 to do a public notice in the newspaper for the three times that they have to do a notice, as well as all the public hearings and things. With this ordinance or with this new rule, essentially the landowner gets a survey or somebody gets a survey, then they apply to the city, and the city passes a resolution or I think it's an ordinance. I'm using those interchangeably. The city passes an ordinance that accepts it into the city. We let the state lieutenant governor's office know, and it's in the city. So it eliminates a lot of the hearing and notices that would happen under a normal annexation process. The trouble we've found with the particular ordinance that's been proposed is there are several various islands. You can see even this this is an island all by itself, and then this unique shaped piece is an island. So there are a lot of islands in the city. I think right now the county has recommended 18 different islands to be annexed into the city. The cost for those is about $2,000 for the survey to be completed. And if we were to just count on property taxes to recoup the cost of that survey, it would take us 30 to 50 years, depending on the parcel, to recoup the $2,000. So the county has recommended that they would like these parcels to come into the city. We don't have to accept them, but we just wanted to start the discussion, see what the council wanted to do. I know the previous mayor and future mayor had suggested that the county should participate in the cost of that. I know some property owners have said they will participate in the cost of it. The Mackley piece is a good example. They want to come into the city and develop, so for them it's actually cheaper to do it this way than the other way. There are other individuals who own single homes that would be willing to, split part of that cost with somebody. If they can't do it themselves, the whole $2,000. The trouble is, if it's an 8,000 square foot lot, it costs $2,000, and if it's 40 some odd acres, it costs $2,000. So there's not really a good economy of scale for the size of parcel that's coming in. So council, are there properties that you want us to explore? Do you want to put something together to approach the commission about helping support the cost? Do you want to enact a policy that the city will share in the cost with the individuals who want to bring their property in, or do you just want to let people bring them in and come to the council and we can do individual ordinances for each property that's been recommended? It's completely up to you.
Didn't we just have this discussion like a year ago? I mean, it's almost like the same, and I thought it was Blake and Sarah weren't here, but I thought we said, let the individuals bring it in and we'll go from there. That's kind of what I thought. This is being pushed by the county, correct?
Yes.
So I don't know. Seems like we just had this conversation.
Okay.
And wasn't there some who didn't want to be annexed in?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that this ordinance does technically allow, or this new state code does allow the city to, I shouldn't say the city, it allows the county to strong arm people into cities, but it requires the city to willingly accept, and if the council doesn't want to force anyone in, I don't think anyone on the staff or any of the elected officials of the city have suggested that anyone be forced to come in that doesn't want to.
Why is the county wanting this to happen? I mean, since a year ago, I still haven't heard any plausible reason for this.
So the most likely scenario is, if you're looking at a safety perspective, it's who's supposed to respond when the police are called. Is it the sheriff? Is it the local people? Is it which fire engine should be dispatched first? Fire's not as big of an issue in that typically the call will go out and the closest engines go, meaning our Northview Fire District are likely going to show up before anyone from the county because they're going to be sent to back the county up, anyways. And so I couldn't tell you fiscally what the county's goal was. I know that it was a big push after it was passed last year, which was right after a county election. So I don't know if there was a piece of property they were trying to get into a city that, kind of in between elections, or I don't know that there was something driving it other than they're trying to clean up the property lines.
On the public safety piece, couldn't we accomplish whose policing department makes the call through an interlocal agreement? Something along those lines? Isn't there another vehicle that these county, because any of these county islands calls right now, NOPD is the one that's going to show up.
We could do an interlocal agreement that is very specific. Typically there'd be a cost for that. With Northview Fire, it's a little hard because the properties are actually taxed
Right.
whether they're in the district or not, and anything that's in the county is not in Northview's fire district's boundaries. And so there's just some nuances to work out where essentially the county would have to reach an agreement with Northview Fire for those services as opposed to the city. And
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I think, Phil, part of the conversation we had last time, and you were here, so you may remember, it was, I mean, a lot of these islands and stuff are on our roads. And so we end up plowing the roads and servicing the roads and everything, where people who have these little islands aren't really paying towards. So that was part of the reason, part of the argument for having the properties come in. But again, I and as far as having the city help pay for them, I don't know. I'd have to. I mean, if somebody wants to be annexed to become part of our city, and it's, I think then that's when we start considering it. But I don't think we should force anybody to. That's my thought, anyway.
And do you give some type of notice if you're going to, if we're in bulk annex all of these properties? Do you give them? Do they have an option to opt out, or are we just harming everyone if we approve it in a bulk measure?
So they were all given notice by the county, and there was a public hearing before the county passed its ordinance. But the state code doesn't require a public hearing before the city council, if I remember right, or a notice. Essentially, I'll have to double check that for sure. But my understanding was there was one notice and public hearing before the county commission.
I wouldn't have any heartburn over sharing the cost of the survey with those properties that want to be annexed into the city. But I'd have a real kind of knot in my stomach about this whole strong arm policy of forcing people to annex into the city who aren't using city services. I mean, yes, we are plowing the roads, but we're doing that anyway. We can always work on an interlocal with the county. We've talked about this a few times in the past with the police department and our officers responding to county islands. I think there are other avenues that we can help cover the fiscal cost of that without forcing people to be annexed in. That's my thought.
So with no time restriction, can we just hold these maps that have been surveyed to the time that the property owners request annexation and on there, can they get with their neighbors and possibly we do a bulk annexation of those 4 properties at the time, or are we talking about all of these 12 sheets together?
It would be one island at a time. So the way it's been proposed by the county is by island. So some of these sheets show more than one island on them, but they're still as a per island. So in theory, the county could modify their recommendation to change the island, but I think the intent of the state code is to take the whole island or none of it, is kind of the way it's written. So.
And that would be a separate ordinance for each island?
Yes.
Yeah, that somebody comes and save them the cost of having to have it resurveyed and then say, okay, now we accept this island, when the person from the residence requests it.
Yeah.
So this being a proposal from Weber County, is there any obligation to be involved with Weber County?
No, there's no obligation to respond to their recommendation or anything. We can just leave it as is.
There's no technical obligation. What's the unwritten obligation?
The county has followed up with our planning department to just say, is North Ogden doing anything? And so I think it'd be helpful to get some sort of clear direction, and we can let the county know where we're at. I think North Ogden has more islands in it than any other municipality in the city. I think most municipalities have 4 or 5. islands, depending. Some of them are quite large. Like I think Ogden actually has a much larger land area than we have even combined, but it's one big island. It's not 18 or 20 or however many we have. And the county didn't recommend every piece be annexed into the city. Those larger agricultural parcels, they've recommended stay agricultural. I think understanding that at some point, if they develop into houses, they'll be annexed in as part of the development process.
I think we could reach out to those that are willing at this point. You mentioned that there are some who've expressed a willingness to do it. I think we reach out to those, but beyond that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
So a case-by-case basis?
Yep.
Yeah, I think so.
Do we need a motion on that one?
No, because it's not official action until we were making a decision on individual parcels.
Okay. Thank you, council. Meeting is now open for public comments. Please state your name and address as you approach the podium.
Julie Anderson, 940 East, 2600 North. I just wanted to share a couple of things with you. I would really like the recommendation that the rural areas that are in the county, that we leave them alone, that they stay rural, that they're not annexed into the city, that they're allowed to do what they need to, as far as that is concerned. Secondly, I want to commend Hannah. I know how hard those queen contests are to put together, having done them for rodeo queens for a number of years now. And if she finds that she can't keep Miss North Ogden, I would like you guys to know that you actually do have North Ogden royalty, and they're called the North Ogden Junior Posse, and have been in existence since 1956. And these kids, these girls and boys, by the way, represent the city very well in many events. I can tell you that we've had several of our North Ogden Junior Posse kids actually presented at the rodeo as they become Weber County royalty, but they still consider themselves North Ogden. So Hannah, if they're really awkward with you, we can work together and we can have some great royalty representing the city. I also wanted to take a moment to thank you for your consideration for this conservation easement for Barker Park. I think it is absolutely fabulous, and I hope you follow through on it this time. I was actually involved in it when Carl was talking about it. Was actually involved, was at the meetings when they talked about that, and we talked about that. And I think it would be absolutely awesome to put this in to protect it from future generations, as Phil says, bringing the axe down on it and building on it. It is a beautiful piece of land that Barkers gave to this city that can become a beautiful gem within the city. Well, they didn't give it, they purchased, that you purchased from, excuse me. Thank you for, Cheryl, reminding me that. But no, she has every right. I have to use the right wording. But I think it can become a very beautiful gem right here in the middle of North Ogden, just like Central Park is in the middle of New York City. So thank you.
Neil Barker. I'm the owner of Cold Springs Trout Farm, one of those islands, unincorporated islands. I just want to thank you for the discussion that you had tonight. I felt like it was very fair and correct, especially the clarification by John Call there at the end that the county commission recommended that the agricultural lands, the large tracts of agricultural land, stay agricultural. We did get a phone call from Commissioner Gibson, and he told me, well, backtracking a little bit, I went to that meeting in June and listened to their ideas of annexing all these islands in, and I spoke there, and then afterwards talked to Commissioner Gibson, and he said that after hearing what I had to say, what Lyman had to say, what his son had to say, he felt like it was important to preserve these agricultural tracts, and he said that he would not recommend annexing in. So I was a little troubled when I saw the picture that shows this on there, knowing that Commissioner Gibson said he wasn't going to recommend it. And I'm grateful to hear that, and I just wanted it clear to all of the council that Cold Springs Trout Farm does not want to be annexed in. It's a great city, but there's benefits of being in the county, and that's the only way we can survive is staying county and enjoying the benefits that the county has to offer. And I think that's about it. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
My name is Ryan Brown. I live at 1356 East, 2600 North. And I just want to comment about the city the annexation into the city proposal. I've gone to a couple of meetings, and I have 2 parcels of ground. One parcel is in the city, one parcel is in the county. And my only concern is that I'll be able to have horses and have horse property. My parcel that's in the county is just raw land. There's nothing on it. It's just land, and that's what it is. So it doesn't get serviced by North Ogden City for any utilities. I guess maybe the road to get there is the only thing I guess North Ogden City would take care of. And so in your decision, just hopefully we can work out something where we can be grandfathered in and have horse property, and I can park some equipment there, or some negotiation can take place, and I don't have to worry that I'm just going to get forced into the city and not be able to have animals or park equipment there. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. If there's no further comments, Councilman Turner, do you have any comments?
Next week we have we're out by 6. What time are we starting again?
We'll start at 3 o'clock.
At 3 o'clock.
At 3 o'clock? Okay, I may be just a little bit late. I got a work meeting from 2 to 3. I'm in South Ogden, but I will be here. I'll see what I can do to sneak out of that early. I love to sneak out of them early. So.
Okay. We'll work you tardy if you're not here, so.
Okay.
Councilman Severine?
Nothing.
Councilman Swanson?
No, nothing. Thank you.
Councilwoman Stoker?
Just a couple of comments on what Ryan Brown and Neil Barker had to say was that when we were discussing this a year ago on the annexation of some of these properties, those were some real concerns because if they came into the city, it changed what they had to do to be city and not county. So I think that was part of the reason why we decided we weren't going to go that route or force anybody to do it, if you remember right. So we're not always all bad.
Okay.
So that's all I have to say.
Councilwoman Fawson, we want to thank you for your great service. Do you have any other comments for this group?
I do. For the record and for the vast audience in person that's there with you, I just want you to know that there's a current position on the council available. This is not an easy job, and I believe that the council, both the council that's here, the current elected council, the past council, they've been really proactive in finding solutions for North Ogden. They found avenues for funding for essentials in the city and for development within the city, and really in trying to make our community a nice place to live. I think many people are very quick to criticize the individuals who serve in elected positions, and few people are quick to volunteer to step up to those positions and actually do the work. So I challenge you to volunteer. This is the time. This is a great time to volunteer, and an opportunity is available. Serving on the council allows you to participate in finding solutions, coming to decisions that aren't always easy, hearing broad community input, collaborating on issues, and many times you have people with views on opposite ends of the spectrum. I invite you to continue to participate in the public discourse. It's important not just for the issues that are in your backyard, it's important for your community as a whole. I really think the more we promote and participate in our community, the more we promote good, and we come to love the place we live. So I have loved being on the council. I'm thankful for the citizens of North Ogden and the council for their trust in me, and I'm sad to leave this service behind to take a new full-time job, but that is the direction I'm headed. That's outside of the community. So I wish you all well, and thank you for allowing me to participate.
Thank you very much. John?
Just a side note, as we talk about potentially preserving some rural development, if we do a TDR, Ordinance of Transferable Development Rights, we could make those pieces subject to that as well, as far as the giving zones, which would then preserve them forever. The biggest issue we have is making sure there's enough there that someone can, even a hobby farmer can pay for their gas and their tractor to do it. I mean, it's kind of a economies of scale thing, but that's something that would be part of that talk as well. So, and that's everything I've got.
Thank you. Annette Spenlove?
Yes, we need to cancel the council meeting on the 27th.
Correct, that's those.
Of this month. It's not next week, but the following week.
So we won't have one for the next 2 weeks then?
Right. Well, we'll have a couple of items on next week's, but you've
Okay.
got to be, caucuses start at 6:30. You need to be able to get out of here and
Right.
go to those. So,
And then nothing on the 26th?
nothing on the 27th.
Do we need a motion for that?
I need a motion.
I'd move then that we, why are we canceling it?
There's no one to do your minutes.
Move that we cancel our city council meeting on the 26th of March because we won't have minutes if anybody shows up and does anything. 27th. 27th.
Have a motion by Councilman Swanson.
Second.
Seconded.
Second by Councilman Severin. And begin the vote with Councilwoman Fossen.
Yes.
Councilman Severin.
Yes.
Councilman Turner.
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Motion passes. Comments from the staff? Tiffany or Dave? Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all. Have a good night. Bye-bye.